Chapter 865. In the end, Old Hand and Jiang Zhong were taken away by Goto Yoshitomo. Okuhiri Rongzo couldn't get away either. He was sitting in a car right now. Then Goto Yoshitomo and his group went to the passenger terminal. Aside from sitting in his own car, there seemed to be no difference between him and Old Hand. "President, I'm very sorry." Okuhiri Rongzo finally dialed the number. He was already prepared to bear the wrath of Matsudaira Yoshio. Okuhiri Rongzo believed that this was the correct judgment. This involved the current background of Osaka City. If he forcefully stood out at this time, it would only bring about a calamity, whether it was for himself or for the Great Zei Order. According to Goto Masayoshi's words, the Soul Cult has already been determined to be an illegal cult, and Veteran is an important contact for the Soul Cult in Band City. And recently, Veteran has already formed an economic relationship with Jiang Zhong, cooperating to purchase the shares of a processing factory. He believes that under the premise that we clearly have a better way to make money, discussing the purchase with Veteran is suspicious of us transferring benefits. Moreover, there are so-called upper echelons of the Blood Flame Order involved in this. The Blood Flame Order is a greater suspect in the assassination of the Soul Order in Xia City. They may also be in cahoots with the Soul Order. Therefore, he wants us to confront Mr. Mo and the others of the Blood Flame Order. He even wants us to go to a location on the lake that is suspected to be a stronghold of the Soul Order. Strangely, Matsudaira Yoshio didn't get angry. He faced the troubles of the processing plant and the encounter of his close friend Jiang Zhong with inconceivable calmness. It sounded like he was more interested in Goto Yoshitomo. Is that so? It seems that the clues are complete. Even if his reasoning is arbitrary, it has basically achieved a closed loop. He finally found an opportunity to binge. What does the president mean? He's coming for us. While carrying out the mission, he's filling his stomach. Matsudaira Yoshio was so calm that it seemed like he was talking about other people's business. If he's going to be used as a vicious dog, his stomach needs to be hungry. If he's going to be used as a knife, he needs to be sharpened before the battle. This way, his bite will be deeper and the knife will be more ruthless. He's starving right now. If he doesn't find food, how can he prop up his skin and bones? Aohei Rong-san could more or less understand Matsudaira Yoshio's meaning, but compared to Goto Yoshio's usual methods and behavior, other than the appearance of a drug addict, there was no connection between him and hunger and torture. Suppressing the doubts in his heart, Okurin Rong-san voiced out his greatest worry. If that's the case, the possibility of today's matter being reduced to a small matter doesn't exist. Unless he can find a fatter bone. Aohei Rong-san's heart sank. He more or less understood Matsudaira Yoshio's deduction. Due to the escape of the deity of the main priest, the Great Zei cult could be considered as a toothless tiger. However, they still had quite a considerable property in Band City. If they weren't meat, then who was? Things were awkward. If the Amaterasu cult had continued with their original plan, they might have been able to gain the reputation of having foresight. But as time went by, the Amaterasu cult seemed to have completely forgotten their big plan, and their situation in Band City became more and more difficult. During this period of time, more than one new and old force had shown malice towards them. Goto Yoshio was the biggest threat among them, and also the most evil one. It was not impossible to take over the Great Zei cult's main property in one fell swoop by the Amaterasu cult. At present, they had unknowingly walked to the edge of the cliff. Aohei Rong-san took a deep breath. "President, how should we deal with it?" From a practical point of view, the cult has little chance in Band City. Even at this time, Matsudaira Yoshio's tone was still calm, almost like a pure objective analyst. The foundation of the cult has been scattered, revealing a gap. There is no reason for others to hold back, and even I will make a move. Just for Goto Yoshio alone, there are still some variables. Because even if he is a vicious dog, before gnawing on a meat bone, he still has to listen to his master's words, bare his teeth. Maybe he will get a kick. Ha! While Aohei Rong-san was stunned, the speed of the car he was in slowed down. The motorcade pulled out by Gota Yoshio had already successively left the high-speed magnetic rail, entered the passenger terminal of the Ping Trade Market, and then stopped. Unable to communicate with Matsudaira Yoshio anymore, Aohei Rong-san hurriedly hung up the phone, adjusted his breathing, and opened the door to get out of the car. The car was parked by the shore of the lake. It was cloudy today, but the sunlight that shone through the gaps between the clouds still had the effect of heating up and causing dizziness. In such an environment, Aohei Rong-san felt very uncomfortable. Before him, Gota Yoshio had already gotten out of the car in front, looking at the high-class yacht berth on the pier. The pier was bustling with people coming and going, but over there, the density of the people was still 2 or 3 levels higher. The area where the yacht berth was had already become a typical scene of confrontation. On the shore, a group of people gathered, all of them were strong and well-built, dressed in black suits, and in the middle were a few people dressed in standard combat uniforms, but they did not look like good people. In the sky, there were drones buzzing. On the lake near the shore, there were 3 to 5 speedboats, roaring back and forth. Sea, land, and air attacked, and the center of focus was the yacht on the shore. As for the yacht, near the shore, more than 10 strong sailors stood in a row, their backs against the almost 10-meter-high hull, and their momentum was not inferior. This scene seemed to be rounding up some criminal, but it seemed to make sense to change the position. Aohei Rong-san, of course, knew the background of both sides. Not to mention the group of people on the shore, some of the important figures in the Heavenly Council still had a lot of opportunities to show their faces in the peaceful trade market and even in Band City. As for the yacht that was stuck in the berth, it was sold from his hands to the Blood Flame Order 2 weeks ago, in exchange for some working capital. Now, even the name on the paint on the side of the yacht had not changed. Gota Yoshio's eyelids drooped, half covering his protruding eyes, and sighed with emotion. People now are not like in the past, they all have to hit their heads and bleed before admitting to their debts. Aohei Rong-san really wanted to tell him that if people in this world were like meat and bones, then what was the meaning of the Heavenly Council? Thinking about this, Gota Yoshio understood this logic better than anyone, so he just sighed with emotion and waited for someone. Gota Yoshio. A somewhat stiff tone sounded from the side of the parking space. A dark-faced man in a standard combat suit strode over. Compared to the violent people in the distant confrontation area, he had the same sturdy physique and the same combat suit. When this man wore it, he looked quite formal, but no one knew where he came from. Gota Yoshio did not get angry because of the other party's impolite way of addressing him. Instead, the smile on his thin face became clearer. Captain Jimmy? The black-faced man smirked towards the standoff area. You did this? When I flew back, I thought we could start the war, but it turned out to be this kind of scene. The police, SCA, and even the Band City branch could all go. Why did you let these unruly guys come? No, we first need to observe. Facing this rather arrogant captain, Gota Yoshio was still neither hurried nor slow, only opening his mouth and laughing. My mission is to observe, and observation requires different situations and conditions. If both sides are law-abiding citizens, and everything is done according to the rules, what's the meaning? Oh, that's a good reason. Captain Jimmy could see that Gota Yoshio was purposely trying to intensify the situation. This was in line with his expectations, but he still made some minor corrections. He directly reached out and, without any regard for himself, grabbed Gota Yoshio's shoulder, and pushed this observer forward. What you need is to observe up close. Gota Yoshio did not resist, only the corner of his mouth twitched. Yes, if I want to upgrade, I need you guys to do it. Believe me, I can't wait. An evil dog that had not eaten its fill, a sharp knife that already couldn't wait. In the eyes of Okuni Rong III, Gota Yoshio and this Captain Jimmy both had corresponding roles, and the relationship between them was rather subtle. There was a difference in their levels, and also differences in their functions, but fundamentally, they were both tools. There was no essential difference. Of course, even if they were to use tools, hand-eye coordination was also necessary. They still had to communicate with each other. Goto Yoshio asked again, although it might not be used, in terms of evidence, I'll let these cities side cooperate, we can also directly confront them. So obedient. People die for wealth, birds die for food. We're the best at this point. Why don't we arrange it now? It's good to communicate in advance. At this moment, Goto Yoshio's subordinates had already brought over veterans, Jiang and other key figures of the so-called chain of evidence. He set off first. A group of 10 or so people walked along the wooden walkway by the lake towards the confrontation scene. Captain Jimmy did what he said, and while walking, he made a call. How's the preparation going? Let Cadman answer the phone. Speaking of which, the speed of changing people over there was a bit slow. Captain Jimmy didn't speak for a long time. Okuni Rong 3 finally felt that something was wrong, and turned his head to look, only to see that Captain Jimmy's face was dark, and his eyes turned back from the empty state of long-distance communication, focusing on one point. At the point of focus, which was the shore of the lake they were about to pass by, sat a person on a thick short metal pillar that was part of the fence. That person didn't have too many characteristics that could be remembered. If one were to forcefully describe it, it would probably be a particularly leisurely body language. He was wearing casual clothes, his legs were naturally spread apart, his head was raised towards the sky, and his mouth kept opening and closing, looking like he was neurotically talking to himself. Of course, it could also be that he was chatting with someone through the built-in communication device. This was a very normal scene, placed in the passenger terminal with people coming and going. There was nothing out of place. But now, in front of the yacht not far away, there was a tense confrontation atmosphere, separated by less than 30 meters. This gentleman's performance seemed somewhat out of place. Captain Jimmy's reaction didn't need to be said. The moment he saw this person, Okuni Rong 3 was somewhat unable to lift his feet. Goto Yoshio, who was beside him, even slowed down his steps earlier than him. The dim yellow eyeballs in the eye sockets had a clear shift, bringing along that withered head, completing a shift of attention. But no matter how they reacted, the distance between them and that person was quite close. It must be because the place where they parked was too close. Due to the close distance, they could clearly hear that person's talking to himself. Mother's Day. That's right, big sis, you're so smart, I definitely won't get involved. You're smart, but I'm not stupid. We've never done this kind of foreign festival. Most likely someone leaked the information, so you came over to denounce us. Heh, you finally enjoyed a few days of peace. Just obediently go into seclusion. When you come out of seclusion you'll go on a rampage and shock the world. Strange? What's strange about it? I've always talked like this. Don't worry, my position here is different from the past. Naturally there will be people to serve me. It's more comfortable than at home. Yes, I won't get carried away and purposely cause trouble for my family. If it's your turn to deal with matters, this world is more or less a step away from destruction. Just a joke, just a joke. That man used a normal speed to chat and laugh, but it made Goto Yoshio's group unconsciously slow down their steps. In the end they were still unable to maintain their natural posture. One after another they stopped, standing at a position approximately 7 to 8 steps away from the man, staring over there without looking away. About 20 seconds later, that man finally ended the chat, smiling as he hung up the communication. And also at this time, he seemed to have finally discovered the abnormal attention over here. Slightly turning his face, he also cast his gaze over, meeting face to face with this side. Aohei Rong-san had long recognized who it was, subconsciously wanting to greet him, but for some reason, the words were stuck at the tip of his tongue. It was close to noon. Due to the thick layer of fish-scale clouds in the sky, even if the sunlight passed through, it was not considered hot, especially with the slightly moist air from the lake's surface. Under the pressure difference between the land and water, it could be considered to be very comfortable. But at this moment, the gentle breeze that brushed against their faces had clearly turned into a layer of invisible and heavy curtain. Perhaps it was even soaked with water, as it blew over and fiercely pasted on their faces, sealing their mouths, noses, and even their orifices. Even their pores were sealed, isolating them from the inside and outside. For a moment, they actually felt as if they were suffocating, spreading from their brains and hearts. For a moment, the group of people's mouths and noses were interrupted. As for the rest, nothing happened after that, only the gentle breeze, with the water vapor on the Beishan Lake, neutralizing the heat of the noon sun, fresh and pleasant. At this time, the veteran, who was caught in the crowd, finally saw the person on the shore of the lake. For a moment, he still couldn't believe it, but that person turned his gaze, smiled slightly, and greeted him. Master Shou. In the heart of the veteran, the emotions of hesitation and surprise pushed back and forth. A voice came up to his throat, and he blurted out, "Mo. Mr. Mo." The man smiled again. "Those things I want, I hope they don't delay the work. In the factory, they are still working." The veteran clearly knew that the atmosphere at the moment was delicate and tense, like a pile of gunpowder that was constantly being compacted and could explode at any time. But his sharp temper, which had been honed in the wilderness for decades, also came out at this time. "We don't have anything that's fake. It's all hammered out, so it's definitely real." "That's good, I'm counting on it." Chatting with the veteran, as if there was no one else around, under the gaze of many people, Mr. Mo's gaze again turned to Jiang Zhong in the crowd, stopped for a few seconds, then lowered his head again, and beat his thigh, as if to get rid of the invisible fatigue. Also at this time, there was a sudden commotion at the confrontation scene not far away. Over there, the densely packed group of violent people suddenly opened a gap, as if someone came out. But in the end, what passed through the gap of the crowd was only an empty electric wheelchair. From the analysis of the gradually approaching noise, the electric motor of the wheelchair seemed to be not working, only God knows where it came from. Along the way, the aggressive members of the Heavenly Council looked at this thing pass by like idiots, and not a single one of them reached out to stop it. A few seconds later, the electric wheelchair that had already lost half of its functions obediently stopped next to Mr. Mo. The latter slowly stood up, leisurely moved up, and then adjusted his sitting position before letting out a long breath. His gaze moved to Goto Masayoshi's face, and met with his dim yellow pupils. The swelling of Goto Masayoshi's eyeballs was even more obvious. The pupils did not move, but there were layers of dark light, intersecting and blending in the depths. Mr. Mo blinked and praised, "Your eyes are not bad. I feel that they are even better than mine." That tone of voice was like meeting an acquaintance on the road, asking where he bought the sharp goods on him, and how much it cost. And also while speaking, in front of Mr. Mo's left eye, a monocle appeared out of thin air, floating in front of the eye socket, reflecting the sunlight, covering half of the pupil's color. Chapter 866. When Mr. Mo started to greet his acquaintances, Captain Jimmy moved back and let Goto Masayoshi stand at the forefront. He himself issued a series of orders through the deep blue platform. Over at Band City, a few orders were quickly executed, but the communication that had been made thousands of kilometers away still hadn't reached the most important person. Captain Jimmy was a little annoyed. "You're still giving the witness lunchtime." Over at T-City, Hood, who was also a captain, laughed. "Sorry, he's a greedy hyena. Once he smells blood and flesh, he always wants to take a few more bites. This is his old nest, and he always forms groups. How annoying. Now that the negotiation of the agreement is coming to an end, we want to wait for him to sign before connecting the call to prevent new situations." "Sign, huh? Do we need to find a lawyer for him?" "Prepare yourself, and there are two of them. The other ability user associations and veterans associations have about a squad of witnesses. You said you wanted to make it an ironclad case." Jimmy was speechless. He admitted that he had originally set up this line to cause trouble for the nominal supervisor, Bai Xinyan, so he had taken a more righteous path. But now the situation had changed. Listen, Hood, don't talk nonsense now. I just want to know how long it will take to sign. Be more precise. Oh, let me calculate. Probably, soon. If he talks as much nonsense as you when testifying, I swear I'll slit his throat. I can do it for you. I've had enough of him these few days anyway. The two captains reached an agreement from thousands of kilometers away. Captain Jimmy then passed the information to Go to Masayoshi through the preset channel. The latter didn't respond, as if he was focusing all his energy on communicating with Mr. Mo. Go to Masayoshi's eyes were still locked with Mr. Mo's monocle. The thin skin on his skeletal face trembled slightly as he maintained his chatting posture. Your monocle is also not bad. It's formed directly from water molecules, right? As far as I know, the only thing in the world that can directly form molecular structures is the dripping sword. To be precise, it's the condensation ring. The secret skill that Her Majesty Empress Wu released in the headquarters RT-8313 mission attachment 2 is indeed the dripping sword, but there are 6 basic structures hidden in it. The only one that truly has the effect of mobilizing water molecules is the condensation ring, which is also the most valuable one. The topic suddenly changed. Regarding this, the different observers at the northern mountain lake and even further away all had their own judgments. Mr. Mo. The inner world has never heard of any Mr. Mo. On the private airship, an efficient monitoring system was transmitting the situation of the lakeside to them at the same time. There were only a few spectators, but they were all very important. After returning to Osaka, the sickly Tamagawa Aishuk unconsciously straightened his back. He was very interested in this character. Of course, part of the reason he had suddenly roused his spirits was that the Pope had already cut off communications and had not yet suppressed him. The condensation ring, Mr. Mo, the connection between these two isn't clear. He looks like a good teacher. Tamagawa Aishuk stared at the monitor screen, watching the two people discussing the condensation ring. The more he listened, the weirder he felt. 10 seconds later, he shifted his gaze to Bai Xinyan's face. Who is he talking to? Bai Xinyan sat on the armrest of the sofa and tilted her head to look at the private projection area. It was showing a conference room in T-City, thousands of kilometers away. She and Tamagawa Aishuk were looking in a completely different direction, so it took her 5 seconds to respond. Go to Yoshi, to a certain extent. That should be the right way to put it. I'm talking about just now. That old man, you have information on him. Shou Xiong, nicknamed Old Hand, the one he was talking to himself. Tamagawa Aishuk's face turned green, and his voice became sharper. Bai Xinyan spread out her hands. How can I guess that? Tamagawa Aishuk quickly controlled his emotions. His eyes became sharper, and there was even suspicion in them. Don't you have any ideas? You can tell me if you have any ideas. Bai Xinyan pushed the question back. Tamagawa Aishuk stared at Bai Xinyan. He cracked a smile, but his teeth were still clenched. There are only 2 ideas. One is to find a woman who is qualified to be his sister, in the blood flame order according to the character setting of this Mr. Mo. Bai Xinyan responded casually, but her gaze was still on the private projection area. In the conference room in T-City, the 2 rows of negotiators had already started shaking hands, as if they were having a formal business negotiation. Actually, there was no difference. Tamagawa Aishuk's face turned red again, and he unconsciously raised his voice. The other one is to expand the scope a little, and search for people that we know and don't know, people who have a sister in the inner world. Oh, that's a lot more troublesome. It's just a screening condition. Tamagawa Aishuk's fingers twitched, as if he was really going to give the order. His eyes were still glued to Bai Xinyan's face, and he continued to ask, it would be best if the 2 directions work together, but if there is only one condition, which one will you choose? Bai Xinyan looked back and smiled. Of course I choose the most reliable one. You. Bai Xinyan continued to smile. Right now, we can't avoid making guesses, but our guesses are all inconclusive. Why don't we continue looking? As she spoke, she moved her hand, and the private projection area was placed in the main projection area of the room, side by side with the surveillance footage of the North Mountain Lake. Look, although the two sides are still minding their own business at the moment, at a deeper level, there are already undercurrents flowing, and we're just waiting to break that information barrier. Aren't you curious about what will happen then? Tamagawa Aishuk was very annoyed by Bai Xinyan's beating around the bush. What's the point of finding a witness to identify him? Whether the identity of Mr. Mo is real or not, whether his relationship with the Blood Flame Order is shallow or deep, who cares? Even if the connection at T-City is successful, and the identification is successful, do you really expect him to just stand there and let us capture him? Instead of playing this kind of detective game, why don't you let your team of subordinates directly take action, and go to Masayoshi will be able to see more things. Captain Jimmy needs a key to open his own weapon box, and always stand on the side of morality. This is a rare quality for frontline personnel. Bai Xinyan seemed to be completely unaware of the twists and turns of the plot. She displayed the bearing of a superior, but quickly changed the topic. Mr. Yuchuan, is it really okay for you to make your contempt for the Blood Flame Order so obvious? Tamagawa Aishuk sneered. Stray dogs, rootless duckweed, even if I want to pay attention to them, it depends on whether they can handle it. Bai Xinyan was not in the position to defend the Blood Flame Order, she only shrugged. We still have to respect the judgment of the frontline personnel. Even if there really is a problem, this is not an intercontinental airship, and the distance is so close. Are you afraid that we won't be able to react in time? Tamagawa Aishuk's slightly flushed face was now whitened, and his straight back collapsed. The scene fell into a deadlock, awkwardness, and some kind of doubt that was not fully displayed. Under such an atmosphere, there was finally a change at the passenger terminal. Goto Masayoshi broke away from the strange state of looking at the monocle and chatting around the condensation ring and entered the main topic. Mr. Mo of the Blood Flame Order, you can call me that. What's your full name? Position in the Blood Flame Order. Goto Masayoshi gradually increased the pressure, also closely watching the reaction of Mr. Mo, relying on the special structure of his eyes. He was equivalent to a human-shaped lie detector, able to monitor the breathing, pulse, skin moisture, and so on of the target in detail, but Mr. Mo's cooperation was obviously not enough. This is an interrogation. If you can't find a more suitable term, you can temporarily say it like this. I think it still has the corresponding qualifications. As he spoke, Goto Masayoshi reached into his pocket and took out a vintage leather wallet, from which he took out a beautifully designed business card. There are a lot of titles on it, but there is a higher probability of finding a position corresponding to the interrogation from it. Sakura Officials, Ability User Association, or something else. These are all fields that I am good at. Mr. Mo didn't intend to take it. He just narrowed his eyes and slightly raised his head to look at the still dazzling edge of light in the gaps of the thick fish-scale clouds. Mr. Mo. I think no matter how dazzling your titles are, they can't compare to today's sun. I don't like this weather, and I don't like you either. Only this pair of eyes is a little more interesting. Goto Masayoshi was stunned for half a second, then laughed out loud. No matter how he laughed, the surrounding atmosphere quickly turned cold and stiff. At this time, Captain Jimmy, who was already half hidden behind him, coughed lightly, giving a signal of everything is ready. Some things are not up to people. Goto Masayoshi's interesting, dim yellow eyes locked onto Mr. Mo's face, and between the gaps of his lips and teeth, he chewed out syllables that sounded like ice. As he spoke, he shook his wrist, his fingertips drawing across the faces of Jiang Zhong, Okuni Rong, and finally falling on the side of the veteran. This person, he's under my protection. If there's anything, you can't go wrong by looking for me. Goto Masayoshi choked, and the wrinkled skin at the corner of his mouth trembled. He wanted to laugh, but felt that it was exceptionally strange. He subconsciously glanced back at the veteran, only to see that the latter also had a confused expression, as if he had even forgotten to be touched. A frank answer. Although it was somewhat unexpected, Goto Masayoshi still quickly calmed himself down. His dim yellow eyeballs slightly shifted in his eye sockets, focusing on Mr. Mo's face again. Then, you're admitting your connection with the soul cult? Mr. Mo sighed. So, you admit that the Blood Flame Order and the Soul Order are colluding, damn you. This is the most despicable slander. A shout suddenly sounded on the dock. A thick Western accent, as well as the environmental sound that seemed to be slamming the table, seemed out of place in the lakeside dock. On the dock, most of the people were shocked by this voice. Shifting their gazes towards the direction of the voice, what they saw was a rippling halo. This was the projection area. In order to have a good effect on a sunny day, they had even done some processing, so that the colors of the people and the background inside were more or less distorted, but the clarity was still above the standard. Everyone could tell that what was shown in the projection area was a conference room. There were about 10 people inside, divided into 2 groups, sitting face to face across the long table. There were all kinds of hair colors, eye colors, skin colors, and all kinds of skin. Their body language was uniformly relaxed. There was only one person who had just stood up from the main seat of the conference table. His expression was sullen, and he even waved his arm, to the point that the corner of his suit was lifted. It felt like he was walking with the wind as he walked towards the direction of the camera. Hasty judgment, ridiculous accusation. You guys made a long-distance connection just to let me see this. The angry man's camera sense was very good. The position where he stopped it was just right, giving the audience here a sense of oppression, but also not causing his face and figure to change. Speaking of which, he had a great figure. Wearing a casual suit, matching with his deep and upright face, as well as his slightly slovenly brown beard, he had the air of a celebrity, a person who could easily leave a deep impression on others. Being scolded by such a person, Goto Masayoshi's tolerance seemed to have increased. His expression didn't change at all, his gaze still fixed on Mr. Mo's face, not even blinking. On the other hand, Mr. Mo was a little curious about the newly appeared projection character. Shifting his gaze, he turned around in the projection area, and also made eye contact with the angry man opposite him. The angry man made an immediate reaction. His body slightly leaned forward, further increasing the pressure. The reputation of the Blood Flame Order cannot be controlled by some shameful smelly bug. Who are you? Mr. Mo asked curiously. What? The other side was obviously stunned for a moment. The instantaneous reaction caused many cracks to appear on his angry expression, which was then drowned by a smile caused by absurdity. You don't know me. Mr. Mo leaned back on his wheelchair, slightly tilting his head and curling his lips. His posture was actually a little childlike naivety. Even if he didn't say anything, he didn't hide his true thoughts at all. Should I know you? The angry man completely broke down. He laughed out loud, half turning around, his right hand hitting his chest, displaying an inconceivable emotion to the others in the conference room. See, he said he doesn't know me. At least half of the people in the conference room laughed out loud, while the other half didn't know whether to laugh or cry as if they were watching a ridiculous play. Gathering the cognitive resonance of the entire conference room, the angry man turned around again, his deep eye sockets and grayish-green pupils filled with a joyful emotion. I don't know how to address you. But there's one thing, since you don't know me, then in the Blood Flame Order. Cadman, don't be rude. A sharp voice cut across, forcefully interrupting the speech over there. And just on the path that the electric wheelchair had just passed through, Ian Liu, dressed in a professional suit, passed through the crowd and quickly approached. Oh. Ever since the remote projection appeared, Goto Masayoshi, who had entered the mode of watching a show, suddenly felt his blood vessels twitch as he watched Inlo receive the treatment that the electric wheelchair had previously received. The heavenly citizens, that had gathered at the pier, tens of over 100 violent people, stood in a dense mass, each of them glaring fiercely, but didn't do anything. This wasn't right. Goto Masayoshi had never restrained his subordinates, and his heavenly citizens weren't righteous people who didn't offend anyone, but a nest of violent scum who wished for the whole world to be in chaos. Then, what the hell was this? Welcome twice in a row. Goto Masayoshi pursed his lips, his dim yellow pupils shifting in his eye sockets. His line of sight moved from far to near, sweeping past several key positions at the pier, passing by Inlo, pausing for a moment, and finally landing on Mr. Mo's face again. "Sir, are you okay?" Inlo finally arrived at the most tense area. She had seen the changes at the pier from the boat, so she rushed over as fast as she could. Before getting off the boat, her main targets were the drug addict Goto Masayoshi, and Captain Jimmy, who had retreated to the back. The two of them appearing at the same time proved that the two groups of people who had enmity with each other in Band City had already merged. She thought that this was already the end of the challenge. But she didn't expect that halfway through, a new variable that shouldn't have appeared. D City, which was supposed to be the rear, actually stabbed them through the air. To Inlo, who was temporarily in charge of teaching affairs during Mrs. Halder's seclusion, this was an unforgivable mistake. Especially after that unthinkable experience. Inlo came here with a poisonous fire burning in her heart. On the way, she even ignored the omnipresent sunlight and the spiritual pressure that followed her like a shadow. As for the violent people at the pier, they really didn't count for much. Mr. Mo didn't comment on her arrival. This made Inlo feel increasingly uneasy, but she couldn't allow her impatience to destroy her demeanor. Otherwise, she would only lose face for her boss. She could only use the opportunity of bowing to Mr. Mo to regulate her breathing and consciously stand behind the wheelchair. She lightly grasped the handles on both sides of the wheelchair and confirmed her position. Only then did her line of sight turn towards the projection area on the pier, towards the familiar person who was thousands of miles away. "Cadman, in front of Mr. Mo, you're too presumptuous." Cadman's full beard and snow-white teeth formed a brilliant smile. "Mr. Mo, is it the Mr. Mo who doesn't know me, and I don't know him?" At this moment, Goto Masayoshi should have been the one to speak up and cooperate, but for some reason, he was staring at Mr. Mo in a daze. Captain Jimmy, who was at the back, saw that his reminder was futile, so he rolled his eyes and went up himself. "Cadman, as a high-ranking member of the Blood Flame Order, doesn't know Mr. Mo, who claims to be a member of the Blood Flame Order, and the Order's Deputy High Priestess holds a completely contradictory position. What does this mean?" Inlo was expressionless, but the flames in her eyes seemed to want to penetrate the projection and burn D City, which was half the Pacific Ocean away. As a Deputy High Priestess, Goto Masayoshi's hoarse voice cut in at a timely moment. "Deputy High Priestess In, at a time like this, the hierarchy within the Blood Flame Order is at most a part of the evidence. It's definitely not suitable as a tool to refute the evidence. Speaking of which, Mr. Cadman has already voluntarily signed the relevant witness agreement, and the legal department, along with the D City Ability User Association, the Veterans Association, the Mercenary Service Club, and other experienced third parties, have done the notarization. In terms of the priority of legally admissible evidence, Mr. Cadman has already surpassed you. It complements his status as a high-ranking member of the Blood Flame Order." This was a premeditated encirclement. Inlo felt even worse. If it was possible, she would have pressed Cadman into the lava lake at the bottom of the Blood Soul Temple, rolled him over 100 times, cooked him, and exploded him to vent her anger. But now, the space of thousands of miles had erased all possible weapons, leaving only the least lethal words, high-ranking. Mr. Mo's low voice sounded like he was talking to himself, but it also carried a tone of doubt. Captain Jimmy defended his statement first. There are only 9 members of the Order's Council in the entire Blood Flame Order. Of course, they're the high-ranking members. Cadman cooperatively bowed and revealed a reserved smile. At the dock, Mr. Emo shook his head slightly. My energy is limited, so I'm not too clear about the Blood Flame Order's current governance structure. I only know that the Order has 127 fanatics and 1540 devout believers, and 127,000 shallow believers. You're not one of them. Without waiting for the others to respond, he tilted his head back slightly, as if he was talking to Ian Lowe, but also as if he was sighing with emotion. As an order, the number of devout believers and fanatics is, to be honest, a little low. It's not enough to support the Blood Soul Temple's full operation, is it because of the ideology church? Ian Lowe, Cadman stared blankly for a second, before revealing a brilliant smile like that of a star. Mr. Emo, are you going to deny Madame Halder and Madame Ian Lee's authority over the selection and appointment of the Order's believers? You should know that I greatly respect the Order's trust in me, and I have a good collection of the appointment letters and authorization certificates they've issued. There's also more concrete evidence. Cadman stretched out his hand. Beneath his bronze-colored skin, there was a layer of dark blood-colored light flowing. The air around his arms seemed to have been scorched by a high temperature, forming obvious distortions. However, the shirt and suit sleeves above his wrists showed no signs of being charred or burning. Violent Flame Seal. This was one of the Blood Flame Order's high-end physical techniques. For someone like Cadman to be able to execute it without needing to adjust his chi gathering, it was already a high level of proficiency. His combat power was definitely at B rank. Most importantly, using a physical technique to form a supernatural power close to flames would definitely require a powerful interference power. As a fleshly ability user, Cadman could only rely on the Blood Soul Temple to achieve this effect. I can call upon the power of blood and fire at any time. I've always believed this to be the acknowledgement of the Blood Flame will. But now... Mr. Emo, are you going to deny all of this? Cadman found the feeling of anger in the time it took to say a few words. He used a brilliant expression to smoothly transform it. Vice mean, could it be that you aren't going to give your devout believers a doctrinal explanation? Ian Le didn't respond. Mr. Emo scratched his chin. Oh. In this sort of situation, even if we eliminate the factors of philosophy and methods, the Blood Soul Temple system does indeed have some unreasonable areas. Cadman nearly couldn't keep a straight face. The way you speak doesn't sound like someone from our primordial sect. It sounds a bit like the restraining faction. The so-called restraining faction was the branch of the Blood Flame Order that Tian Bang, who was known as the #1 person below the Transcendent, belonged to. It was this military powerhouse and his influence that had chased Madame Halder's group from Xia City to T City. Cadman's words were filled with malice and sarcasm. Unfortunately, Mr. Emo was completely indifferent to this. The doctrines of the Blood Flame Order are actually quite mediocre. It's better to refer to the real thing and study it seriously. It's not too convenient for me to go over right now. How about you come over? Someone in the conference room of T City let out a muffled laugh. The situation was slipping to an even more absurd level. Cadman spread his hands. He was already at a loss for words when it came to this Mr. Emo, who was sometimes mysterious and sometimes crazy. That's a really good suggestion. I think I have enough time to consider it. His arms spread out and swung along with the movement of his limbs, bringing with it a scorching hot wind. The power of the explosive flame seal still affected the surrounding area. Ha! Cadman subconsciously swung his hands again. The dark bloody light was disturbed by the airflow. It was like a flame had been blown up from a half-extinguished pile of embers. The light suddenly brightened. There really was a flame. A bloody flame burned. Cadman's expression changed. Chapter 867. The others in the conference room could not see Cadman's face. Most of them were still immersed in the joyous atmosphere caused by the absurdity. However, there were still some people like Hood, who was not part of the negotiation. Hence, he did not sit at the side of the table. Instead, he followed his professional habits and stood in the corner of the conference room, approximately to the right behind Cadman. At that moment, he saw Cadman extend his right hand to the side of his body and fling it continuously in an unnatural manner. Under such circumstances, the sudden bright color of the flame became exceptionally strange. As a normal person, there would always be a period of adaptation to changing from one mental state to another that was contrary to that mental state. Hood hesitated for 2 seconds. Finally, he walked forward quickly to ask about the situation. However, when he was just 1 step away, Cadman's fling movement suddenly became 10 times more intense. It was like an intense punch. Hood's sensitivity was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He made the most accurate response. Relying purely on the strength of his waist and abdomen, he bent his upper body backward and slid his feet at the same time. The fist wrapped in blood-red flames was almost swung at his chin. Hood could even hear the sound of the air being burned, as well as some indistinct and chaotic noises mixed in. Cries of surprise rang in the conference room. There was also the sound of tables and chairs scraping against the floor. Some people stood up, while others froze on the spot. However, they were all clearly frightened. The joyous atmosphere from before collapsed in an instant. In the next second, Hood pulled away from Cadman and shouted sternly, "Cadman!" Cadman did not respond. After throwing that punch, he seemed to have lost control of his body. He staggered a step and turned his body sideways. His left hand moved horizontally and pressed down on his right shoulder. This was his most instinctive reaction. At that moment, the blood-red flames that were blowing on his right hand had already broken through the boundary of his wrist. They were rapidly spreading towards his arm and even closer to his torso. The strange thing was that the flames had clearly scorched the air and even raised the surrounding temperature. However, the surface of Cadman's body was still relatively intact. It was only soaked in a thick dark red color. Even the clothes on his arm were not damaged at all. Instead, it made his face look even paler. In such a situation, it was impossible to tell what was real and what was fake. It was as if some inherent nature had been distorted by some kind of power. "What did you do?" The sudden change in the conference room was clearly transmitted to the passenger terminal through the remote video. Go-To Masayoshi's muffled voice rang out. There wasn't much righteous indignation from being bound together against a common enemy, but more of surprise, as well as a strange sense of excitement. Go-To Masayoshi kept staring at Mr. Imo. In the shortest amount of time, to gather enough useful information was his mission, even his destiny. Therefore, to him, he wasn't afraid of Mr. Imo making a move. The state that he was in earlier was the most unacceptable. But even if he made a move, it didn't feel any different. After the previous round of observation, Go-To Masayoshi had already faintly noticed that Mr. Imo seemed to be wearing a thick and heavy cloak at all times. Of course, this was only a description of Mr. Mo's marvelous pattern of concealing the operation of his extraordinary power, or perhaps this pattern itself was the external representation of the operation of his extraordinary power. Go-To Masayoshi judged that Mr. Mo's core secrets were all hidden under this cloak. This thing was so thick and wide, airtight, hiding everything tightly. Even if a corner was occasionally lifted up, what could be seen would be chaotic and blurry, without any discernible silhouette. Under this kind of situation, no one knew whether Mr. Imo under the cloak was naked, or wearing armor, or perhaps inside was simply an arsenal that defied normal spacetime logic. That's right. It was this cloak that formed a kind of black box sealed with special rules, isolating the outside world from prying. What was shown was merely the result, for example, welcome, and the like. Just like the electric wheelchair and Ian Lo who passed through consecutively just now. Or perhaps right now. Was it really Mr. Mo's method? Specious, this was very annoying. Towards Goto Masayoshi's inquiry or confirmation, Mr. Mo didn't have any response. His expression didn't change either, only maintaining a look of interest. He rubbed his chin, as if watching a movie, watching the image transmitted back from thousands of miles away. Instead, Ian Lo, who was behind him, seemed to have lost control of her expression. She had already unconsciously opened her mouth, looking a little sluggish. Returning to the axis of chaos, there was no doubt that Cadman was still in pain. In terms of his mental state, his change was more intense than anyone else's. The direct, inexplicable, and even unreasonable threat impact shook his will in the most direct manner. At this moment, from the angle he was standing at, other than Hood, no one else could see his face clearly. But regardless of whether it was in the conference room or the passenger terminal thousands of miles away, everyone could see that this originally handsome man's cheeks and muscles were currently distorted like a monster. Perhaps it was precisely because of the compression of these muscles, Cadman let out a completely different scream, "Let go of me." His next move was basically about to tear off his entire right arm, but the bloody flame steadily and resolutely spread over his shoulder, burning his neck, torso, and head. Along the way, it also ignited his originally intact left hand. Shaw! Hood displayed the decisiveness of an operation team leader. He exhaled and shouted, forming his right hand into a knife hand and slashed down towards Cadman's abdomen. The air where his fingertips and forearm touched was clearly distorted, as though it was covered in a layer of invisible flames. The format of fire. Although he was shocked by the scene before him for 3 seconds, Hood's follow-up reaction was still the fastest. He quickly made a judgment that this was inextricably linked to Cadman's use of the violent flame seal to mobilize the power of blood and fire. As it turned out, this was a foolish act that provoked the Blood Flame Order's authority, but first, the connection between the two had to be severed. Hood's individual strength was certainly not at the level where he could contend against the fundamental strength of the Blood Flame Order. But the instant he made his move, all the members of the operation team inside and outside the conference room instantly synchronized under the drive of the 7th-generation dynamo core. They jointly constructed a tight, formatted space, and formed the greatest support for Hood's hand blade that his physical body could withstand. This was already the strongest attack that Hood could unleash while not wearing his armor. The clothes on Cadman's chest silently tore open, and the lower half fell down, exposing the muscles of his chest and abdomen, as well as the blood-colored flames that were burning on it. And in that 1 second, or maybe half a second, the fiery tail of the flames was pressed down. It was indeed pressed down, but that was all. Time passed by another time, and the blood-colored flames once again began to expand wantonly. The format of fire, which was known to be able to format all extraordinary powers in the world, didn't play its intended role. Hood felt as though his knife hand had cut into a layer of thick cloth that was soaked in water. Most of the power had already dissipated in the distorted and chaotic structure before it could make contact. Cadman screamed once more. Completely at a loss, he instinctively flung his left hand that had just come into contact with the flames. He wanted to fling the flames away, but it was all in vain. The speed at which the blood-colored flames spread wasn't particularly fast, but as long as they came into contact with it, they wouldn't be extinguished. At that moment, Cadman's entire upper body had already been completely covered by the blood-colored flames, including his entire head. The corners of his eyes had already burst open. What splashed out wasn't blood, but like the residue of burning plastic. There were even more flames flickering in and out of the other orifices of his 5 senses. No one knew what Cadman was feeling at that moment. The seemingly harmless flames brought him unimaginable pain. But it was very obvious that Cadman's mental barrier had already been burned to ashes. He began to shout frantically. "Let me go. I beg you. God. Spareem." Hood's fingertips were a little numb. This was most likely due to the interference of his emotions. Had the direct contact just now attracted the demonic fire over? In the depths of his thoughts, there was no doubt that there was fear and dread. This made Hood's mood even worse. Driven by his emotions, he was desperate. He roared in the direction of the projection, "Jimmy, damn it, why are you guys just standing there? Do you think you're useful?" The emotional shout made most of the people at the passenger terminal turn their gazes to Captain Jimmy, who had been berated. In the blink of an eye, he became the center of attention, but Captain Jimmy's reaction was unexpected. He didn't speak. He didn't communicate. He didn't act against Mr. Mo, who was just inches away from him, as Hood had hoped. Instead, he followed his earlier trend and retreated, his speed increased explosively. It was also at this moment that a cold and hard mechanical voice came out of nowhere. "Warning, your actions have already constituted a first-degree intentional murder using extraordinary power. Please immediately stop and deal with it harmlessly. Otherwise, we will take action." The sudden and strange warning caused everyone to be somewhat distracted. And at this moment, Captain Jimmy had already swept past Masayoshi and the veteran from the back. He used their bodies as cover to increase the distance between him and Mr. Mo. Then, he crashed heavily into the front section of a parked flying car. The clack of the mechanical parts disassembling and reattaching did not stop. The outer shell of the crashed car seemed to come alive. It transformed into a set of metal components and gathered around Captain Jimmy's body. It instantly formed a set of exoskeleton armor, arming him to the teeth. Captain Jimmy looked like he was coming over empty-handed. In fact, he had his deep blue walker exoskeleton follow him in a stealthy state. It could be upgraded to its strongest state at any time. Even before Captain Jimmy's transformation, the moment Captain Jimmy began to retreat and the mechanical voice sounded its warning, there was a bang from the surface of the lake near the shore. 2 water pillars exploded and 2 fully armed deep blue walkers leapt out of the water's surface. Because their synchronization rate was too high, the 2 splashing sounds seemed to merge into one. The ice storm machine cannon in their hands had long since locked onto Mr. Mo in the wheelchair and began to preheat and idle. The special physical ammunition built inside was specially designed to deal with the powerful interference power of spiritual type ability users. It sprayed out in a form similar to a metal storm. Coupled with the support of the formatting domain, it could instantly tear apart a B-rank spiritual type ability user. After the preheating was complete, Captain Jimmy was fully armed. The automatic mechanical sound also came to an end. Captain Jimmy had no intention of playing it again. He directly issued an attack order through the 7th generation Dynamo Core and the Apocalypse Array it was linked to. This was the mission he had to complete as the high-level thug of the Amaterasu Order. As for the cause and effect, as well as the meaning behind it, none of it was within the scope of his consideration. The only extra thing he had to do was to give himself a layer of insurance. It was at this moment that Captain Jimmy once again felt a stuffy and astringent feeling assaulting his face. It felt somewhat familiar, just like when he had bumped into Mr. Mo today. It felt like a thick, wet cloth had been thrown over his nose and mouth. Wait a minute. He was already under the protection of the deep blue walker exoskeleton. In the next second, a violent shock attacked him. The Apocalypse Array system operating at high speed indicated that the automatic defense function of the sound wave weapon had been activated. It also automatically judged and simultaneously activated the infrasonic wave defense structure. If necessary, it could be activated at the first instance. At the end of last year, when the entire system was still in the experimental stage, it had specially added a targeted plug-in module. For a moment, Captain Jimmy thought that this slightly redundant module was about to be used, but reality proved that he was thinking too much. But on a certain level, his imagination was far from enough. At this moment, the passenger terminal at the shore of Northern Mountain Lake had indeed been attacked by a terrifying noise. The explosive sound wave shock was like a passing storm, engulfing the 100 or so people on the passenger terminal in one go. At this moment, 99% of the people showed signs of either high or low levels of mental confusion. But the Deep Blue Walker defense was effective, and the two powerful attackers weren't affected at all. The ice storm gun barrel had already begun to spit out ammunition. But right in front of the gun barrel that was rotating at high speed, two flesh and blood creations that resembled giant palms inexplicably appeared. One on each side, extremely symmetrical. The gun barrel had already locked onto its target, but it was forcefully lifted up by the two monstrous giant claws that were wrapped in scales. The powerful kinetic energy of the physical ammunition certainly pierced through them in an instant, but the upward momentum didn't decrease. Flesh and scales splattered everywhere, and the follow-up ammunition had long since flown off to who knew where. The well-trained powerful attackers wanted to make adjustments at the first instance. But the turbulence in the void rushed back and forth. This time, it suddenly leapt to the next level, transforming into a violent and restless mental storm. A series of disturbances and attacks, from incorporeal to tangible, from material to mental, seemed chaotic and complicated, but they converged and integrated into a common source, and then focused to form an explosive point. The lake water that struck the breakwater exploded with a rumble, and a considerable portion of it evaporated into water vapor in midair. The blood-colored flames cut it into fragments until it completely evaporated. It was in this space where water, light, and fire interweaved that a malevolent creature whose entire body was dark red like blood appeared with a roar. It seemed to have rushed up from the bottom of the lake, but its specific trajectory was indistinct. Following the appearance of the vicious creature, the impact of the single-point explosion increased explosively by more than 10 times. Even Captain Jimmy's mind sank a little. The two powerful attackers who had received the direct impact of the mental storm were in a much worse state. A suffocating gap allowed the pair of giant palms that were already badly mangled to fiercely slap the exoskeleton armor, sending them flying away at the same time. Fortunately, before the battle, the team had already completed the connection between the mental and physical plane in advance, realizing the interference and connection between the mental plane and the material plane, creating a tightly formatted space that could jointly bear and divert the external impact. The two people who were hit didn't show any serious injuries. But in this way, the previous ambush-killing move was all a joke. Captain Jimmy cursed. He wanted to attack again, but when he looked at the vicious creature that suddenly appeared by the lake, he was a little stunned. The vicious creature was huge, with long arms and a tortoise's back, almost in the shape of an ape. Although it was habitually hunched, just the body that appeared on the surface of the water was already more than 3 meters, and even so, there was still a section below its thigh that was below the water surface. Its entire body was covered with bulging muscles and dense scales. As it rose and fell like it was breathing, the heat on its body was like a bloody light, like a flame, and it felt like the surrounding water was about to boil. And it was precisely this vicious creature, or perhaps because Mr. M.O. who was near the shore felt that it was blocking too much light, so he scolded it. This enormous creature then obediently shrunk its body, curling into a ball and pressing down into the lake, only leaving its neck and shoulders above. It just happened that its huge head passed over the fence, and visually, it was already about the same size as Mr. M.O. who was in a wheelchair. Separated by Mr. M.O., Goto Masayoshi carefully observed the vicious creature. In the depths of the dim yellow eyeball, the layers of light became more and more complex, the level of power that was being used also became more and more profound. This caused a huge pressure on his body, causing the blood vessels and tendons around his eye sockets to bulge, especially the temples on both sides. It was almost like a dense net. So ugly. Jiang Zhong, who was very close, seemed to be affected by the sound wave attack. He actually didn't feel any fear, and only muttered his evaluation. The target was a little vague, but they were all suitable, causing the veteran and A.O. Ping Rong to look at him. But at this moment, the most eye-catching was still the ugly monkey and the most important person beside him. From start to finish, Mr. Mo, who was in a wheelchair, did not move at all. Actually, most of the people on the pier were the same, it was just that the others did not have time to move. As for him, Mr. Mo's gaze was focused on the projected area. He looked quite serious, to the point that he didn't seem to care much about Captain Jimmy's death trap. The people who had just caught their breaths unconsciously followed his gaze, and once again turned their attention to the conference room thousands of miles away. In front of the camera, Cadman, at some point, was already stuck there, his knees bent and his spine curled, his left and right arms half raised, bent into a stiff angle, as if he had raised his hands to surrender, but his crazed raised head made it look more like a prayer of failure. Burp. A strange sound similar to a burp came from the ugly monkey's enormous cranial cavity. The pipe that made the sound was the area on his face equivalent to the mouth and nose. There were no obvious organs there, only dark purple and wrinkled flesh. It felt like a piece of rotten meat. There were a few intermittent openings in the middle, they were all opening up, squeezing out saliva pus. It was more like the sticky lava flowing out of the cracks of a volcano, black and red interweaved, burning the air, about to fall but not yet. On the other side, Goto Masayoshi, who had been observing all this time, suddenly had a twitch in his temple, he noticed. On that lava saliva, the scattered fire pattern cracks faintly pieced together to form a face. And it was getting clearer and clearer, more and more definite. In the projected area, the image of Cadman, who had already turned into a burning statue, became more and more similar, reflecting each other. Chapter 868. It was indeed Cadman. While the two groups of people were separated by thousands of kilometers, most of them could only rely on the visual similarity, as well as the logical reasoning of the situation. Goto Masayoshi had already used his special ability to find conclusive evidence. Although from the perspective of mutual interference, the outline of the human figure in the lava saliva had already been changed beyond recognition by the violent aura of the ugly monkey. But as long as one could grasp the most essential core inside, and then follow the cause and effect to push back, one could basically complete the restoration. That guy Cadman had a physical body, so he was originally unable to achieve the effect of Ian's spirit leaving body. But Mr. Mo had also considered this point, and used the lava saliva to create a temporary container, which could also be called a cage, to absorb his soul body over, and also achieved a rather complete reflection. If Cadman didn't mind, it wouldn't be a problem to use that saliva as a body. Goto Masayoshi saw through some things, but the price he had to pay was severe physical discomfort. His eye sockets were burning hot, the dim yellow eyeball was slightly pulsating, bringing up the eyelids and the surrounding blood network, forcing them to increase the speed of blood supply in order to offset the loss of special vision. Goto Masayoshi was really having a hard time. The miraculous actions of the eyeball had already exceeded the upper limit of his consciousness control. What was worth rejoicing was that this effort had obtained corresponding results. And he had also discovered even more. In Goto Masayoshi's eyes, the current projection area was like a demonic mirror. It only reflected the most important part, and then made absurd distortions to all other elements. On both sides of this mirror, no matter whether it was the two parties in the T-City conference room who were closely related to Cadman, or the heavenly people, who were purely there to support, in a sense, had already unified and mutated into a kind of low-level existence. The number of these people, and the difference in their appearance, seemed to no longer have any practical meaning. If one had to forcefully come up with a meaning, it would probably be equivalent to raw materials. People could not believe in the correlation between both sides of the mirror, but this mirror was simultaneously reflecting the panic and fear in their hearts, and it was vividly displayed. These negative emotions that had been detonated and multiplied continuously were being transformed into a special form of existence on the mental level, or perhaps in the deeper realm, and were communicating with Mr. Mo limited by his own level and comprehension. Goto Masayoshi was unable to understand too much. He could only make a superficial description. It was roughly like the pervasive dirty smoke, moving through the gaps between the slight lifting of the heavy cloak. Of course, the smoke leaked out, but the process only happened in an invisible place, in the black box deep within the cloak that was difficult to observe. Over there seemed to be a demon enjoying this special ingredient. It was eating clouds and spitting out smoke in a leisurely manner. And when Goto Masayoshi wanted to pry a step further, what should be sealed was still sealed, what should be chaotic was still chaotic. It shouldn't be. Separated by thousands of miles, the consumption of the tyrannical and terrifying soul absorption wasn't enough to affect the cloak's concealment effect. Or could it be that Mr. Mo's level of control over the Blood Flame Order's fundamental power, as well as the corresponding techniques, allowed him to ignore the obstruction of spacetime and casually manipulate a high-ranking member of the Order like Cadman? If that was the case, Mr. Mo's control over the Blood Flame Order was simply unimaginable. With the existence of such a controller, Madame Halder, as the officiator, was truly purely used for sacrificial purposes. Oh, it couldn't be that the sacrificial object would be Goto Masayoshi, who had forcefully peaked at this level, was reduced to the level of most people, who could only use their poor imagination to make conjectures. At this time, he especially hoped that Captain Jimmy's hand could be a bit more forceful than before, or at the very least, create a bigger gap in the cloak. But the current Captain Jimmy seemed to have been frightened by his thwarted operation. Even though his entire body was covered in armor and his face couldn't be seen, his body showed an obvious sense of stiffness, as if his soul had left his body. Jimmy-kun, still no results. Somewhat unexpectedly, when Goto Masayoshi called out to Captain Jimmy, the latter also contacted him through the preset communication channel. Did you see anything? That monster. What? I'm talking about that ugly monkey, that largest ape-like creature. So what? Captain Jimmy's mood clearly fluctuated. Damn it, have you been scared silly? It's right there, and you're telling me so what? Don't tell me you're only looking at its drool. Goto Masayoshi stared blankly. That's right, such a large mutant was right in front of him, why didn't he pay attention to it, and instead was only interested in the drool that this guy dripped? Even though that was also a very important part, the ape-like creature right in front of him was clearly an extremely powerful mutant. For Mr. Mo to be able to summon it out of nothing, the interference, the consumption, was probably even greater than the long-distance soul-sucking activity under the rules of the Order. He actually didn't think of something that was clearly in front of him. Goto Masayoshi faintly felt that it was a bit strange, and felt that Captain Jimmy's mood was too abnormal. He subconsciously asked, "What did you see?" This thing. You don't know. Damn it, don't tell me you don't have the slightest idea. Should I know? Goto Masayoshi was truly a bit confused. He indeed didn't have any related concepts. At this moment, it was as if there was a piece of information that everyone knew, but it was perfectly missed by him. As a social creature, this kind of feeling was terrible. But this also stimulated his curiosity to an even greater degree. The focus of Goto Masayoshi's gaze naturally spread away from that lump of lava saliva that was about to fall, and expanded to the related area around it, that enormous and ugly face that seemed to have half rotted. The focus of his gaze constantly adjusted, sweeping past the fine scales on the ugly monkey's face, the half-caved-in forehead and crown, the wrinkled flesh, and finally made contact with its protruding crimson eyes. Large and empty, this was Goto Masayoshi's first feeling. But for some reason, he didn't dare to explore further into the depths of the hollow. In reality, at this moment, the frequency and amplitude of his eyelids twitching had increased dramatically. His eyelids that were especially loose due to his emaciation couldn't help but droop, but were stimulated by his eyeballs, and bounced back again. The current Goto Masayoshi seemed to be looking directly at a dazzling light source, looking directly at the sun that was about to rise above and below the horizon. Completely out of instinct, Goto Masayoshi wanted to turn his face away to avoid a direct attack. He indeed completed this action, but what was truly moving was only his neck and head. In his eye sockets, the pair of dim yellow eyeballs didn't move. On the contrary, they even pushed open the eyelids that they were trying to cover, and controlled all the related nerves, blood vessels and muscles, staring fixedly at that ape-like creature's ugly face, especially the large and empty bloody eyes, motionlessly. The dazzling feeling continued to spread over. If it was a normal person, they might have already started crying non-stop. But Goto Masayoshi didn't, because even if the tears were about to flow out, they would still be used by the dim yellow eyeballs as lubricant, better than nothing. Goto Masayoshi's heartbeat suddenly sped up. Part of it was due to the fluctuation of emotions caused by losing control, but the other part, which was also an even more important factor, was that the eyeballs needed more blood supply, more nutrition. Goto Masayoshi's body was heating up, but the pores on his skin were abnormally contracting. It was precisely under such a contradictory reaction that even more energy from his limbs and bones were mobilized, rushing upwards in the most efficient manner for the eyeballs to use. Other than that, there was also the endless sunlight from the outside world. At this moment, Mr. Mo's voice sounded again, as if he was talking to Ian Lu. "Did you see it clearly?" "Ah, what?" Ian Lee's reaction was similar to Goto Masayoshi and Captain Jimmy. Half a second later, she came back to her senses and asked, what exactly is this thing?" "A type of wondrous creation that I discovered in the past. I call it the rotten mouth ape. I only discovered it recently. Although it looks a bit ugly, its entire body can be converted into energy. And it's relatively easy to mold, and its stability isn't bad. It's a natural building material." Ian Lu. It was also at this moment that the air seemed to ring out with a slight air explosion, similar to the noise of bubbles bursting and air burning. It was very easy for normal people to ignore this kind of sound, but a few ability users with keen senses could determine that this sound originated from the ugly monkey. Oh, it should be the saliva from the rotten mouth ape's mouth, which meant that it came from Cadman's side. A judgment was a judgment, but not many people could clearly determine what Cadman was doing. Until Mr. Mo spoke again. "I'm not angry. Why should I be angry? There are people in the order who are 10 times, 100 times more excessive than you, and their statuses are even higher than yours." Ian Lu had been a bit absent-minded ever since the rotten mouth ape appeared. She heard Luo Nan speak of a sensitive topic at this time, and she subconsciously wanted to interrupt. Don't listen to his sophistry. It's nothing." Mr. Mo slightly tilted his head. His thin and ordinary face formed a marvelous contrast with the rotten mouth ape's enormous face, which was only separated by a fence. Since the blood flame was proposed when the order was founded, it is tantamount to giving up a portion of power and the corresponding design. The only reason why a situation like yours has occurred is because the Blood Soul Temple, the foundation of the order, lacks a stable and effective identification and withdrawal mechanism. One is the problem of design ideology, and the other is the problem of design ability. Of course, the lack of reflection and supplementation on the material plane is indeed a troublesome matter. Then there's the problem of the level of the current group of people in the order. Take Cadman for example. He's a blood-sucking bug, yes, but if there's no improvement in the application of ideas, then the vast majority of people in the order are essentially no different from him. Mr. Mo slightly raised his chin when he spoke to this point. He squinted his eyes and looked behind the cloud of fish scales that filled the sky. He looked at the edge of platinum light that cut down. On this point, some people don't hesitate to use materials, but they do it quite brilliantly. Chapter 869. There were always coincidences in this world. At that moment, Mr. Mo looked up and met the observer in the private airship. Even though he knew it was because of the angle of the broadcast, Yukawa Aishuk, who was sitting on the sofa, held his breath. His eyelids twitched, just like a certain guy by the lake. A thought popped up in his mind. He was talking about the true God and the Pope. Yukawa Aishuk quickly ignored this feeling and thought. He forcefully shifted his gaze to the ugly face of the ugly monkey, the ugly face of the rotten-mouthed ape. Stimulated by the forceful twist, some pieces of information flew out and were about to form a string. There was only one line left. A few seconds later, Yukawa Aishuk suddenly raised his voice, "Takamoto, Takamoto." Takamoto Shigeru quickly appeared in the room. Yukawa Aishuk ordered his intelligence chief, the investigation report from the Aptitude User Union, the one about Gong Chi, pull it out immediately. Shigeru Takamoto, who was proficient in this business, did not say a word. He completed all of this within 2 seconds and projected the contents of the report onto the projection area. Yukawa Aishuk's eyes widened as he searched for the information he needed. But he was soon disappointed. The report was vague and only reported the death of Gong Chi. At the same time, they hoped that branches, powerful organizations, and the church could help investigate the solidification of the abyssal region around May 1st, Chan City time. No, not this. Yukawa Aishuk realized his memory was messed up. He clearly remembered something about it. It's in the internal report of the Jade Society, but it's vague. There's only a simple description of ape-like creatures. Yukawa Aishuk was surprised that it was Bai Xinyan who reminded him. When he checked the relevant content, it was indeed as Bai Xinyan had said. It was only better than nothing. No more detailed information. Transcendents are very proud. They won't describe the death of their own kind so clearly. I suggest you get a good night's sleep. Staying up late will really damage your IQ. As she spoke, Bai Xinyan left the armrest of the sofa. She strode out of the room. Ever since the intercontinental airship incident, Yukawa Aishuk had always been suspicious of Bai Xinyan. But when she really left, he was not used to it. Where are you going? Meeting. Don't disturb me during this time, or I'll be very grateful. Yukawa Aishuk was sure that there was a gap in understanding between him and Bai Xinyan, and this gap seemed to reflect the difference in their information levels. In the era of information and authority, there was nothing more depressing than this kind of gap. What was even more tragic was that people like Bai Xinyan seemed to be many more than he had imagined. Along with the shrill siren, the high-altitude region where the clouds were surging was filled with a blinding red light. The image of the environment that was extremely close to reality began to solidify and then fade away. When the visual virtual scene disappeared, the cramped space of the health pod was completely revealed. The warning light on the top of the pod was still flashing rapidly. Tian Bang shook his head. Through the slightly turbid nutrient fluid, he could see the high-priority notifications on the interface of the cabin wall. They glowed red and vibrated continuously, attracting his attention. Due to the limitations of his physical body, Tian Bang decided to use telepathic communication. Dr. Pan, the group's experimental base has been overrun by the mutants. Dr. Pan, who was usually calm and collected, suddenly spoke in a hurried tone, which was rare for him. Big news, big trouble, big opportunity. Anyway, hurry up. I'll give you 20 seconds. Please, I'm in the health pod right now. Oh, that's true. Speaking of which, the health pod simulator is more useful than the helmet. Fine, just stay there. I'll open the communication channel to you. You have 10 seconds now, including the time to look at the data. The communication was then cut off. Immediately after, a portion of the health pod broke away from Tian Bang's control and entered remote conference mode. It guided Tian Bang's senses and projected him into a huge conference hall. The standard of the conference was definitely very high. It was similar to the ring-shaped conference hall where the Star Alliance held a global board meeting. Yes, wait a minute. That's right. Although Tian Bang had never spoken here, he had been one of the people in charge of the security forces and had strolled around inside before. He had already seen the Star Alliance's logo that could be seen everywhere in the conference hall. It looked like a printed simplified map of Earth. Some said that it symbolized the coexistence of the common world and the inner world since the era of distortion. Some said that it was a hint of the existence of the deep blue world when the Star Alliance was first established. Perhaps it really was a big scene. However, the conference had probably been held in a hurry. The conference hall, which could accommodate thousands of people, was mostly empty. The figures were all concentrated near the ring-shaped conference table in the center, and some of the empty seats still had figures appearing intermittently. Tian Bang felt that he should thank Dr. Pan, who had given him the right to choose his image during the virtual projection. Therefore, what appeared in this conference hall of the highest standard was only a humanoid shadow. Otherwise, he would probably be known throughout the world as the Blood Prison Exhibitionist. Good thing I didn't miss it. Dr. Pan appeared beside him. He was still wearing the white lab coat, but it suited his image very well. Tian Bang chuckled. Thank you very much. Dr. Pan waved his hand. Don't worry about those useless things. Watch carefully and digest it well. Although we're just here to listen, we might have a speaking mission. Oh. To be honest, I'm a little nervous. I've never seen so many extraordinaries in my life. They're all top-notch material. Tian Bang, half a second later, his gaze suddenly cut to the ring-shaped conference table in front of him. The ring-shaped area in the middle was already playing an image, in the form of a 30-fold fast-forward. This kind of highly compressed video data would cause a normal person to faint. However, a burner like Tian Bang could use the Dynamo Core's analysis function to directly reorganize the information. As for those who chose this kind of unconventional method to receive information, Tian Bang's gaze swept past the faces and backs of those people in order to compare them with the built-in database. That yellow-bearded old man is the president of the headquarters, Abner. On the left is Marin, who was beaten up badly by him last time. On the right is the #1 ward master, Dale. And there's the Monroe Cannon. Sitting behind Abner is Li Baizhou. Looking at where she's sitting, she's attending the conference as a reporter. Next to her is Ghost Eye. That old pervert still wants to take advantage of her in the virtual world. Her Majesty Empress Wu is also here. Is it really good to favor one and discriminate against the other? Next to Empress Wu is Ouyang Qin. He's always serious. Speaking of which, the seating arrangement at the society's side is a little messy. The seat diagonally across from us is empty, but there's a balance scale. Clearly, the Archbishop of the Order of Justice is also coming. The bald Pope of the Order of Amaterasu has already arrived. Only the most mysterious High Lord of Secret Contract is left. Oh, I can only see the back of his head from where I am. That's right. This was a conference of extraordinaries. It was a dialogue between high-level life forms that had climbed to the top of the world. However, the beginning was nothing out of the ordinary. President Abner coughed and spoke in a gentle and feminine tone. There are still a few who haven't arrived yet, but since we've caught up with the live broadcast, we won't wait any longer. Let's watch while we discuss and exchange our opinions. As he spoke, the video playing at high speed slowed down and entered normal mode. The most eye-catching thing in the video was undoubtedly the huge and ugly face of the demon. Half of its body had caved in, and the other half had rotted away. There was also the lava mouth that was dripping down, as if it could fall to the ground at any time. All these factors fiercely occupied the attention of the audience. However, what attracted Tian Bang's attention the most, which was also the focus of the video, was the man sitting in a wheelchair beside him. He looked unfamiliar and a little too thin, as if he was ill. However, at this moment, he was quite relaxed. Perhaps it was because of the sudden change in speed, but the body language of the man in the wheelchair seemed to be slow and unruffled. He was giving a demonstration to the woman behind him who was gently holding the wheelchair. Look, with this half-energy, half-material thing as a foil, Cadman's body and soul structure is a lot more straightforward. Limited by the conditions, we can only look at the general outline. You should be able to find the resonance structure related to the blood-soul temple. Understand the relationship, and then refer to the actual emotional state of a life form, and you'll roughly know where the problem lies. The man in the wheelchair explained while his hands did not stop moving. His fingertips made a few horizontal and vertical cuts in the air, cutting the dripping lava mouth into 20 to 30 parts of different sizes. Not counting the scraps on the periphery, the main part of the cut was clearly a scaled-down human body, including the head, shoulders, chest, abdomen, spine, limbs, and the isolated internal organs. There were also fiery threads in between. They were like the connecting lines of a doll, but they were also like the blood vessels and nerves of a real human body. It was precisely this dismembered lava mold. The head at the top had already been cut off. It was the size of a date, but it had complete facial features. At this moment, it was completely distorted by fear and pain. Unfortunately, not many people could clearly hear what it was shouting. Inside the virtual venue, most people had dull expressions, but there were also some who were overflowing with interest. This person is certainly an outstanding surgeon. He's also very good at teaching and educating people. Sitting on the right side of President Abner was the world's top boundary grandmaster, Constance Dale. She was still dressed as a medieval witch. Her hood covered her face, and the corners of her lips were half hidden. She carried out her favorite mysticism. Because of this person, I think of another person. He also loves to preach. The legendary Professor Luo. Didn't he come to the conference today? Oh, you're talking about Luo Nan. President Abner stroked the yellow beard on his cheek. His tone was still gentle. This time, it's an analysis and discussion on the death of Deputy Secretary General Gong Chi. It's an invitation system. Luo Nan isn't a relevant person. But according to the theory and level of strength he's displayed recently, he's certainly qualified. As he spoke, Abner cast his gaze towards Ouyang Qin, who was a bit far away. Although it was a virtual world, his gaze was still solid. Oh, Ouyang. Why don't your branch contact him? If it's convenient, invite him over. Everyone can exchange what they need. Chapter 870. Ouyang Qin did not sit at the very front of the ring-shaped conference table. Instead, he sat in the second row with Her Majesty Empress Wu. He sat upright, watching the live broadcast very seriously. His right hand tapped soundlessly on the virtual desktop. The changes in length were quite rhythmic, giving people the feeling that he was taking notes or something. His appearance was in stark contrast to Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was sitting leisurely next to him. Her Majesty Empress Wu was fiddling with the virtual scroll in her hand. Ouyang Qin did not respond immediately when President Abner called out to him. 2 seconds passed before his fingertips stopped tapping. He turned his face away from the central projection. It was unknown whether or not it was a virtual effect, but the frameless lenses clipped to the bridge of his nose seemed to be plated with a layer of light. The lenses covered most of his pupils, and his expression was stern and serious. He still did not open his mouth. It seemed that he was choosing his words carefully. Then. Earlier, you wanted to join in on the fun and get a share of his grandfather's property. Now you're asking for an exchange. Are you preparing to take the opportunity to call each other brothers and get greedy? A moment of silence appeared in the ring-shaped conference room. Then there were coughs, muffled laughter, and of course, loud laughter. At the level of participants, the vast majority of people already had the tendency to do as they pleased. Not everyone would take President Abner's face into consideration. Of course, everyone's gazes were cast in Ouyang Qin's direction. However, everyone could see very clearly that Ouyang Qin did not open his mouth. The voice came from beside him, behind Her Majesty Empress Wu. The audience was already there. Wow! Tian Bang let out a small gasp of surprise. He could clearly see that the person who had spoken against Abner just now was clearly a young girl. She wore a brimmed hat and a black jacket. She looked like she could just go out and do a street dance and play around. She really was a young girl. Tian Bang recognized her. She was Zhang Yingying of the Xia City branch. She was a die-hard follower of Her Majesty Empress Wu. She was also someone in Luo Nan's circle of friends. Speaking of which, this young girl didn't even seem to be an architect. Why did she come to listen? It was fine for her to come with Her Majesty Empress Wu for a meeting, but her words were really out of line. Tian Bang grinned. Don't be fooled by Abner's soft voice. He wasn't able to become the president of the Ability User Society by relying on his ability to eavesdrop. Zhang Yingying also seemed to know that she was in trouble. She pulled down the brim of her hat, shrank her neck, and tried to hide her body behind Her Majesty Empress Wu. No matter what, she would not make eye contact with President Abner. The smile on President Abner's face didn't change at all. He didn't berate the youngster for being rude. He even stopped the furious Marlin and looked at Her Majesty Empress Wu. The expression on the latter's face was indifferent. He didn't react much to the gazes from President Abner and the other directions. Using the virtual book in her hand, she gently combed the hair by her cheek and said softly, "Don't doubt it. It's my idea. Martial monarch, I've just become a transcendent, so I have to make things difficult for him." Those words were reasonable, but they were slightly vulgar. I was afraid that it would damage my bearing, so I let my children speak. Please don't blame me. The atmosphere in the conference room was obviously breaking down. Not just the others, even Ghost Eye, who was standing behind President Abner and chatting with Li Baizhou, was laughing very loudly. In the end, Abner had a deep understanding of the Great Wall Mansion. Even at this time, he was still managing his expression perfectly. The smile lines on his face even deepened a bit, so much so that the yellow beard on the side of his cheeks shook slightly. I understand now. It's because I'm standing up for Toyama's high seas auction. Commercial activities are special in nature. Moreover, times have changed. Everyone holds this meeting for the sake of negotiation and exchange. It's just that some youngsters in the past lacked experience and lacked communication channels. They didn't really know how to negotiate on stage. They felt wronged when they were bullied in a fight, so it was understandable that the adults would stand up for them. And now that the youngsters are independent, everyone is happy to see this happen. What's the standard for children to fight? Ouyang Chen's index finger scraped across the bridge of his nose. He slightly adjusted the position of his glasses and spoke very seriously. I've made a post-mortem deduction of the intercontinental airship incident. When Luo Nan began communicating with the youngsters of the Yuchuan family, the interference power of the abyssal region was far below the observable standard. The level and intensity were considered very low. No matter what, it wasn't out of line. Why did an adult suddenly jump out? You're talking about us, right? The Pope of Baiji let out a low laugh. His thin, hairless face had a calm appearance. It doesn't matter if it's me or Chinju. We won't overstep our boundaries and stand up for the children of other families. As for the intercontinental airship incident, it should be understood like this. Pulling people to the table, whether it's drinking tea or arm wrestling, always requires a bit of effort. Fine, this is your president's logic. The truth is that we've always bullied the weak and feared the strong. It's just that ordinary people aren't as strong as us. The corner of Tian Bang's lips twitched. It was probably only in this sort of situation that these old extraordinaries would speak so bluntly. However, this battle of tongues, which was about to expand, was, to put it bluntly, each family expressing their position. There was no substantial pressure. President Abner's smiling face was the clearest benchmark. Of course, the earliest pressure was washed away by Zhang Yingying's fearless speech. Or perhaps, the time wasn't right yet. Her Majesty Empress Wu reluctantly concluded, compared to the Amaterasu order, President Abner really does care and cherish. Especially his speech. It's incisive, deep and shallow. It's very targeted and instructive. Oh my, where did your extraordinary bearing go? Tian Bang finally laughed out loud. He wasn't the only one who laughed. He wasn't even in the minority. Her Majesty Empress Wu became more and more open-minded amidst her laughter. The only pity is that he beat around the bush a bit. I'm afraid that only you, President, can speak so clearly. How about this? This is the communication method over there. Everyone, no need to be polite. You can discuss and research, or call each other brothers. Just go ahead. I also really want to know what kind of brilliant argument he can make today. As she spoke, Her Majesty Empress Wu tossed out a white bead of light. It spun around in the live broadcast area. It was none other than the special effects of Luo Nan's message link. Tian Bang casually scanned it and confirmed that there were no mistakes. There were quite a few people who did the same thing as him. Luo Nan would probably receive quite a few friend requests after today's meeting. President Abner maintained his smile. He turned his head and instructed Marlon, send an invitation to Professor Luo right now. If he's free, invite him to participate in this discussion. Everyone is looking forward to the splendid explanation that configuration theory will give to this world. Then he changed the topic of conversation. Before the situation changes, everyone should first understand the background information of today's meeting. See why this meeting is being held, and choose this person. Mr. Mo was quite cooperative in the live broadcast. His lecture was neither fast nor slow. It looked like it would continue for quite some time. On the other hand, Vice President Marlon had just made arrangements to contact Luo Nan. He also had to introduce specific information. He was quite busy for a time. The main topic of this meeting is to ask everyone to identify the true murderer of Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi's murder case. Around 4:00 in the afternoon on the 1st of May in Chan City, Deputy Secret Chief Gong was assassinated in his seclusion location. Unfortunately, he perished. The specific circumstances have already been reported. I won't go into detail this time. Headquarters has invited experts to earnestly analyze the scene. Aside from basic judgments such as the time of the crime, motive, and so on, they have also broken down the clues from the act of murder. In the end, a total of 7 conditions were formed. These will serve as the criteria for identifying suspects. The information in the hands of the participants was updated along with Marlon's explanation. First, an electromagnetic ability user. Connie, Monroe, and I fought with the murderer that day, or should I say, one of the murderers. We are certain that he definitely belongs to this type. Second, an extraordinary or a manipulator of the Abyss region's solidified configuration. This should be the case. I won't go into detail. Third, the extreme utilization of the Abyss region's power and micromanipulation ability. This gives people a deep impression. Fourth, the ability to burn and absorb flesh and blood. Gong Qi's skeleton was destroyed by this. Not even his bones remain. Fifth, the ability to assemble and manufacture machinery. The murderer is equipped with an exoskeleton for combat. The style should have been specially issued, but there are too many possibilities. Better than nothing. Sixth, the ability to conceal and teleport. Without this ability, the murderer wouldn't have been able to easily escape from our pincer attack. Seventh, the ape-like creature. It was the first unexpected factor to appear on Volcano Island. To a large extent, it interferes with our line of sight. Moreover, it is highly related to that plane. Everyone understands. Some people laughed, but most people were very serious. The death of any extraordinary was a very serious matter. If a plane was involved, it would be even more serious. Marin continued to emphasize, considering that this matter is most likely not the work of a single person, as long as a single person fulfills 4 of these 7 conditions, they will be a major suspect. Of course, this also has to be in line with basic criminal reasoning. President Abner added softly from the back, if we can directly prove that someone or some people are highly related to that plane, we can basically directly conclude the case. Everyone should understand that this is the core condition and the most direct evidence. Tian Bang curled his lips. T logic. However, the venue was rather lively and noisy. At least half of the people were shouting. Exactly. The way they heckled didn't have any extraordinary bearing at all. Heh, the human heart is like T. After a long introduction, Marin took advantage of the situation and drew everyone's attention to the live broadcast. I've never heard of this Mr. Mo before. However, the blood flame order he's in has previously fulfilled 2 of the 7 conditions, the ability to absorb flesh and blood, and the solidification of the abyssal region. Especially the latter, it has been confirmed that on May 1st, Chan City time, the Blood Flame Order had an unplanned sacrificial event that also lasted for a long time. This bit of evidence is quite solid. Let me add, the most important witness is that person. Oh, Cadman. The unlucky guy whose life and death could no longer be confirmed. Thank you, Apocalypse Laboratory, for providing us with an observation point of view, allowing us to simultaneously witness the birth of this Mr. Mo. At the same time, we also added 2 more conditions. There is one that we can't see, but the evidence is conclusive. This Mr. Mo is quite accomplished in the field of exoskeleton design, and he is very willing to invest. He is currently discussing the purchase of a processing plant in Ban City. As for what we can see, it's a mutant called the mush-mouth ape. There are no records of it in the world's searched information. The only thing that can be seen is that the plane is shrouded in clouds and mist. Chapter 871. Marin spoke quickly, but there were still some who couldn't control their impatience. Not far behind Marin, a loud and clear voice rang out. 4 out of 7, the most important one is more or less confirmed. What are we still talking about here? Let's just do it. General Corney, the association's intention is not to make a rash judgment. Considering the Blood Flame Order's past strength and performance, isn't there still that Mr. Mo? Marin took the opportunity to explain, due to the lack of time, from the channels we currently have, this Mr. Mo has no official information at all. Everything we can find is suspected to be fake, then what's the point of talking? It's definitely an impersonation. And looking at that bear's heart and leopard's guts, he can't be weak. If this guy wasn't an extraordinary. Wouldn't some people who bully the weak and fear the strong have already swallowed him into their stomachs? When the attendees heard General Corney's tone, they thought they would hear some sort of live stream eating *T or something along those lines. In the end, this guy turned cowardly so quickly. Evidently, his impatient tone just now was a sign of him trying to instigate others. For a moment, cold laughter rang out. Although this General Corney had the title of general, he did not actually belong to the military. Instead, he was the leader of a private armed force active in the Central and North Africa region. Although this guy was an extraordinary, he was famous for being shameless. Today, he could be the guardian of a city, and tomorrow, he could be the leader of a vagrant raiding squad. His big mouth could be said to have been somewhat restrained in recent years, but he would still reveal his true nature from time to time. But there were still many people who were willing to cooperate. Not far away from Tian Bang, someone played the role of a sidekick. It's not strange to impersonate someone, but there are dozens of extraordinary in the world, and they're all familiar with each other. So who could it be? Tian Bang tilted his head to take a look. He recognized Sasito of Moose City in Northern Europe. He was a feminine man who was the complete opposite of the common impression of Vikings. He had been active in the fashion industry for a period of time, and had a knack for praising and ruining people. It was said that he did not get along with Her Majesty Empress Wu. Now, a soft knife could be used to stab someone, and it could also be fatal. Compared to Sasito, General Corney was already a straightforward person. He stretched out his pitch-black palm and rubbed his fingers in the air a few times. That candidate, all of you must have molded it in your hearts. Halfway through his words, he saw Ouyang Chen's gaze directed at him. Behind the glasses, his gaze was calm and clear, like a colorless lake, but it could also be said to be like a polished blade. General Kenny was terrified once again. He chuckled and did not say anything else. Everyone wants to snatch food, but no one is willing to stand out. Compared to ordinary people, the mental world of extraordinaries doesn't seem to have any significant difference. After transcendence, there's no such thing as sainthood. Dr. Pan and Tian Bang conversed through a private channel. They spoke much more casually under these circumstances. They're going around and around here because they suspect Luo Nan, right? What do you think? Honestly, I can't tell. Tian Bang knew that the extraordinaries around the ring-shaped meeting platform had invited him over to listen to the meeting only because of his special relationship with the Blood Flame Order. They wanted to obtain more insider information and make a more accurate judgment. This gave Tian Bang a strange sense of self-awareness that he was a traitor. But even if it was out of personal interest, after he digested the information he had prepared for the meeting, he still spent a lot of effort to observe Mr. Mo. Tian Bang had some harvests. He didn't obtain them from Mr. Mo himself. Instead, he obtained them from Mr. Mo's subordinate, Cadman, whose life and death were hard to determine. Tian Bang knew of Cadman. He knew that Cadman was a fleshly adept with decent strength. He also knew of the technique of the violent fire seal. This made him naturally put himself in Cadman's shoes. How could his soul be captured from thousands of kilometers away? Was the violent fire seal the key trigger in the entire process? Was it possible to avoid this result? What role did the Blood Soul Temple, the solidified configuration in the Abyss region, play? What role did it play? Tian Bang analyzed as he put himself in Mr. Mo's shoes. Even though Tian Bang had mostly broken away from the system of the Blood Flame Order and the Restraint faction, he still had some insights. But these were far from enough to be used as a basis for a qualitative judgment. Tian Bang said, Mr. Mo's situation is a clear suspicion, but it hasn't reached the stage of true evidence. If Mr. Mo wasn't an extraordinary, he might have died 100 times over by now. But he is. At the very least, it's highly likely that he is. If that's the case, then the nature is completely different. Dr. Pan, with the rigorous attitude of a researcher, gave a reasonable discussion. Up until now, this Mr. Mo hasn't shown any solid evidence that he's an extraordinary. On the contrary, he's been too vague, Tian Bang laughed. To play with a person's soul in the palm of his hand from thousands of kilometers away. What kind of level is this? That's because he's dealing with his own order's believers. 2 of the leaders of the 3 great orders have come. Perhaps you can ask them how they deal with undevout believers. Is it possible to do things so beautifully from thousands of kilometers away? We've also done a few models of the Blood Soul Temple. If we consider the optimal solution, Tian Bang shook his head. Don't mention those kinds of wild guesses. Besides, doesn't optimal mean the most dangerous? Everyone has to leave a way out for themselves. When it comes to extraordinaries, it's never too much to be cautious. It's been a bit better these past few years. There aren't many cases of extraordinaries fighting to the death, but every time it happens, it shakes the entire world. There's no need to talk about Gong Qi. A few years ago, Jean Buhuan was completely influenced by a nuclear bomb. Dr. Pan, didn't you research there for a period of time? Dr. Pan slowly nodded. Yes. It was in that volcanic area. In comparison, Jean Tong died the most sullen death. He was finished without a sound. He only left behind a mountain of bones for the people of the world. Oh. Suddenly, a new train of thought opened up in Tian Bang's mind. Perhaps, it seemed, it was possible. He found a new piece of evidence. Mountain of Bones, a Blood Soul Temple, and the headband that fell into Luo Nan's hands in the end, an electromagnetic ability user. Jean Tong was an electromagnetic ability user. Although this brother belonged to the fleshly side, it was insignificant when compared to the clues themselves. Tian Bang had heard in Xia City that Luo Nan was researching and developing equipment for the Jean Tong headband. There was a period of time in the past when Luo Nan used the Jean Tong headband to control some sort of advanced civilization's inheritance. None of this was a big deal when considered alone. But when the fragments were put together, 7 to 5, they could even echo each other. What's wrong? It's nothing. Tian Bang wasn't going to be the stupid bird that stuck its head out. He just needed to think a little more to understand that the matter of Luo Nan possessing the Jean Tong headband was no secret. The problem lay in the fact that the cause of Jean Tong's death was still a mystery that had yet to be completely solved. Jean Tong had an inextricably close relationship with the Xia City branch. No one knew how deep the Xia City branch's involvement went. Her Majesty Empress Wu had sent Jean Tong flying. What happened next? To what extent could Ouyang Chen's protective behavior reach? How many supporters did the Xia City branch have in regards to this matter? Sympathizers. Dealing with an extraordinary was on a completely different level from dealing with 2, 3, or even more extraordinary. One had to be prepared for a local war, or even a world war. Tian Bang felt his finger move away from the nuclear button. In order to strengthen his will, he emphasized once more, the possibility of Professor Luo and Mr. Mo being the same person is extremely small. At the very least again. Dr. Pan hated this sort of vague wording. Tian Bang pursed his lips. Anyone who comes from the Blood Flame Order and has received the Order's knowledge system, such as myself, would find it hard to accept that a person who had absolutely no contact with the Blood Flame Order half a year ago can now perform an anatomical analysis of the Blood Soul Temple and the believers under the Blood Soul Temple system. These points of knowledge are very difficult, okay? Dr. Pan sighed. Fine. Even if they aren't the same person, it doesn't seem to be a problem if they have a cooperative relationship. Perhaps. Tian Bang was saddened by his own brain. He couldn't help but ponder along Dr. Pan's train of thought. When did the two begin to cooperate? At the very latest, it wouldn't be later than Jean Tong's death. That was in early December of last year. Mrs. Halder and the others fled Xia City in early November. If they had already reached a cooperative agreement back then, the one who died that day might have been Tian Bang himself. The problem was that the two sides were quite unhappy because of the matter of the Soul Order at the end of last year. But looking at today's information, this Mr. Mo was clearly standing up for the remnants of the Soul Order. The clues were fighting with each other. Besides, this line of thought was still unable to explain Mr. Mo's origins. Looking at his attainments in the foundational techniques of the Blood Flame Order, he was simply an ancestor who had been hidden from the world for many years. But ever since the Order was founded, Tian Bang had a precise grasp on the birth, aging, sickness, and death of all the powerful figures of the Order. He was certain that the Blood Flame Order hadn't had such a hidden ancestor-level figure in the 40 to 50 years since it was founded. Actually, he was a visitor from beyond the heavens. The corner of Tian Bang's lips twitched. This was too fucking roundabout. No wonder President Abner and the others were hesitant. Mr. Mo's entire being was hidden in a dense fog of fragmented logic. At this time, Marlin also expressed a similar point of view. Due to the limitations of the Apocalypse Laboratory's observation methods, we have no way of obtaining more information. Our analysis of this Mr. Mo also stops at the surface. We can't see clearly or see through him. Speaking up to this point, Marlin suddenly changed the topic and launched a sudden attack. The Pope of the 100 Collections is the host in this aspect, and he has set up a grand scheme to illuminate Osaka City. Presumably, he has an even more exquisite view. The Pope of the 100 Collections didn't have the slightest reaction of being attacked. He spoke in a logical and logical manner, neither hurried nor slow. It was as if he had long since prepared for this. I can't say that he is exquisite. It's just that he has seen things a bit longer than others. In my opinion, this Mr. Mo's exquisite control over the power of the Abyss region is something that none of us here can compare to. Chapter 872. Fine control. Isn't it better to just say 7 out of 5? Someone in the venue immediately deciphered the Pope of Baiji's verbal technique. In fact, it was 7 out of 5. If it was really a gang. Tian Bang was still evaluating in his heart, but more people wanted to see proof. Amidst the chaotic cries for explanation, General Kenny became lively again, and his voice was especially loud. If you want to win everyone's trust, you have to at least give a reason. The Pope of Baiji smiled. As I said, this is the result of observation. Because you haven't been able to observe. This time, it was Constance Dollar's turn to speak. This female extraordinaire was a practitioner of mysticism, and she was used to speaking with the prophetic tone of witches and witches. Of course, her eyes were indeed sharp, and because of her outstanding attainments in boundaries, she had a unique view of the current scene in the live broadcast, including the situation in Band City. If the blood surges again, your eyes will be ruined. The Pope of Baiji ignored the deliberate ambiguity in Ms. Dollar's words and continued to smile. This is also a part of observation. While the verbal and scheming battle in the virtual ring venue was gradually accumulating, on the passenger terminal of Band City's Ping Trade Market, which everyone was paying attention to, Goto Yoshimasa was in a state of high anxiety. This emotion, as time went by, and as Mr. Mo spat out words that he seemed to understand but not understand, became heavier and heavier. Especially in Band City today, the boundless light behind the fish-scale clouds that filled the sky should have been his greatest reliance. But at this moment, as the midday sun shone down, he only felt as if there was a blade on his back. The heat continuously seeped into his body and accumulated, but he couldn't find a channel to vent it. In fact, there was, and the channel was the eyeballs embedded in his eye sockets. The heat radiated from the sky was originally used by this pair of special eyeballs, in order to break through Mr. Mo's external appearance and directly to his deep essence. Goto Masayoshi once felt that he could do it. He had the support of the Fusang Divine Tree system. He also saw that Mr. Mo was using methods that exceeded the limits of people's imagination. In theory, this person must also use power that exceeded the limits of people's imagination. Under such circumstances, the black box, created by the cloak, could not be maintained in a perfect and flawless state. This was also the time for this pair of eyeballs to realize its significance. However, until now, the cloak was still a cloak, and the black box was still a black box. He still couldn't break it. Goto Masayoshi could only think like this. With Mr. Mo's ability, most likely dealing with Cadman and his kind would be as easy as flipping his hand, like the clouds and the breeze clear, and would not reveal the least bit of a clue. So, more than once, he hoped that Captain Jimmy would be able to use his hands to create the conditions for him, the eyes, to observe. However, after that detestable bastard suffered a loss, he hid in the tin can and pretended to be deaf and mute. When he was forced into a corner, he even boasted back, "I have a more important mission." This coward. Of course, Goto Masayoshi knew that Captain Jimmy had a backer. However, who didn't have a backer? The problem was that Goto Masayoshi's own backer did not have any new arrangements. Actually, Goto Masayoshi had never accepted any arrangements. He and his Heavenly State Warriors were just relying on the wild growth of the Fusang Divine Tree. He could use the name of the Amaterasu sect to his heart's content, like a fox borrowing the might of a tiger, to obtain benefits for himself, to strengthen his forces, and to become a socialite, in a certain sense. However, his heart was also clear. Behind everything, there was a most essential mission, to be a good eye. However, he did not manage to do it now. This made Goto Masayoshi's mood very bad. The discomfort on his body was much more direct than the change in his state of mind. The eyeball was still continuously gathering sunlight energy, trying to penetrate the cloak on Mr. Mo's body, but it could not find a breakthrough point. The energy was being consumed, but most of the energy was still unable to enter or exit, only operating around the eyeball and its surroundings. Goto Masayoshi felt that his head was swelling, especially around his eye sockets. That pair of special eyeballs seemed to be squeezing out bit by bit. At first, the feeling was not too clear, but when it became clear, it was already too much, and even if he wanted to control it, he did not know where to start. At this moment, Goto Masayoshi felt that he was like an overinflated tire. His whole body was burning hot, and not only was his head dizzy, his whole body was practically about to explode. He wouldn't really explode, right? Goto Masayoshi had never encountered such a situation before, so he was unable to make an effective judgment. And once this thought was born, he could not stop it no matter what. Even though he knew that he should not, in the depths of Goto Masayoshi's heart, fear still seeped into his anxious emotions. Of course, what triggered them was both behind and in front of him. It was also at this moment, in Goto Masayoshi's vision, there seemed to be dirty smoke lingering, undulating inside and outside the invisible cloak around Mr. Mo's body. Those miscellaneous people who had already been dominated by terror contributed another wave of, it's me. Goto Masayoshi suddenly realized, his heart suddenly sank, but the special eyeball still faithfully and objectively reflected all the changes that had happened. It allowed Goto Masayoshi to see clearly what kind of interaction had formed between the negative emotions that were born in his body and Mr. Mo's previous interactions. Wait, a chance. Goto Masayoshi's thoughts once again lagged behind the reaction of that eyeball. The sunlight that filled the sky, under the support of the Fusang Divine Tree's great divine treasure system, formed an extraordinary connection with Goto Masayoshi's special eyeball above the normal laws of physics. After that, Goto Masayoshi felt that his body seemed to have entered a kind of transparent state, creating the best conditions for the sunlight that was projected over. Most importantly, Goto Masayoshi's thoughts had actually participated. As a kind of targeting tool, it had specified the direction and target of focus, and had received the feedback information. At this moment, Goto Masayoshi followed the smoke and saw even more. He saw the trajectory of the smoke circulation, including some of the details of the operation and transformation, and thus naturally discovered that the cloak and black box belonged to a kind of tight and exquisite energy structure, yet still maintained a highly integrated state with the real world. Because of the integration, they were one. It's this. Goto Masayoshi never would have thought that the difficult problem that had been dragging on for a long time would actually have a breakthrough because of his own fear. He also didn't have the time to think deeply about the problem inside, only doing his best to memorize and analyze, trying to dig out even more things. He had already seen the light. Everything was difficult at the beginning. Very quickly, his vision suddenly slanted, completely leaving its original focus. His entire vision was also affected, swaying back and forth. Swaying. The so-called swaying was actually swaying back and forth. It felt like the eyeball wasn't embedded in the eye sockets, but rather attached to some thin string. His randomly swaying vision, in the blink of an eye, he rearranged the situation around him. Mr. Mo, Mush-Mouth Ape, the cowardly Jimmy, his terrified subordinates, and the veterans that he had forcefully dragged over to confront, and so on. Why are all these guys looking at me? And with that kind of gaze? What is this? In his swaying vision, a thicket of blood, flesh, nerves, and bones appeared. It was malevolent and ugly, and emitted an ominous aura of death. It was still burning. Chapter 873. Goto Masayoshi could see that at the top of the burning bush, there was two fruits. On it, there were intermittent embossed lines surrounding it, some thick, some thin, some green, some red. That was blood vessels. His consciousness trembled violently. His thoughts and the veins in his blood vessels merged together, and he suddenly understood what the fruit on the bushes was. That was his eyeballs, at least in name, they belonged to him. The two eyeballs reflected each other, combining with the flesh, bones, and nerve functions at the back, piecing together a complete field of vision, and also reflecting the truth. That was the bloody truth that Goto Masayoshi would never be able to experience under the framework of being a human. At this moment, all of Goto Masayoshi's mind was smeared with strange and dazzling colors. There was no logical relationship between each color, and that was the color of collapse. Even so, Goto Masayoshi was still attracted by this pair of eyeballs, and he could clearly see that the smoke of his negative emotions was wrapped by the essence of his flesh and blood. A part of it was left in the burning bush, which was also the rule system of the great Fusang divine tree. It was the accumulated heat of the sunlight that couldn't be used, and it was the final, meaningless venting. As for the other part, it was together with the people on the passenger terminal who were already seized by fear, together with the same color of emotional smoke. Under the drive of an invisible force field, it was thrown into the depths of the cloak around Mr. Mo, and it was thrown into an incomprehensible level. Although it was incomprehensible, he finally saw it. The pitiful quality that belonged to him was twisted, torn, and completely evaporated in the cracks of the opposing rules. The last of his rationality ended here. Goto Masayoshi had no meaning left, and what was left was only the burning flesh, bones, and nerves. And these very quickly lost the outline of the human organs in the flames. Only that pair of eyeballs that were still filled with blood were shaking in the flames, emitting a demonic light. And it was also at this moment that the passenger terminal finally rang with a scream. The heavenly citizens that surrounded the area were certainly a collection of violent people from Band City, and there was no lack of ability users among them. But when this scene unfolded in front of their eyes, it still broke the nerves of quite a number of people. They had been soaked in fear for too long, and they just lacked a trigger that would allow them to collapse. Plop plop, in the chaos, some people were directly pushed into the lake, subconsciously struggling, and even dragged their companions down with them. 2 to 3 people fell into the water, creating a huge splash, and also caused a slight wave on the shore. The undulating waves naturally spread along the embankment. Some of them even slapped a thick thigh covered in scales and fine hair on the side. A part of the deep purple mouth, and a part of it, and a part of it, a part. A part of the thin smoke flowed in and out, as if there was a high temperature and poison intertwined. A part of it. A part. A part. A part. Thin wisps of smoke flowed in and out of the deep purple slit. It was as if high temperature and poison were intertwining with each other as the lava saliva spurted out. Ah! It was unknown who took the lead, but a group of violent people scattered in all directions. At the same time, more people were knocked into the lake, and as they struggled and screamed in the water, what little order there was fell apart. It's a little ugly. In the virtual ring venue, the Pope of the 100 Collections sighed, looking a little disappointed. No, it's very pretty. Constance Dollar continued the conversation with the Pope of the 100 Collections. This was not a deliberate bickering. At this time, among the various audiences who were watching this live broadcast, a considerable part of them were in favor of Miss Dollar. What they were watching, of course, was not the chaotic and vexed, heavenly citizens on the distant dock, but the entanglement and collision of Mr. Mo's cloak and the forest of burning flesh and bones in the process. Both were creations of special rules. They clashed with each other and penetrated each other, but neither of them was completely successful. This was a confrontation at the transcendent level, but because it was a live broadcast, the corresponding turbulence in the abyss could not be seen. However, it was precisely this half-concealed, half-restrained wrestling that made it all the more obvious. Every audience member, or at least every extraordinaire, had their own guesses. The vast majority of them kept their thoughts to themselves, but there would always be people who would express a very special kind of expression. This Mr. Mo seems to be a gentle person. As a world-famous fashionista, Xiao Saido's voice was quite gentle, but the meaning was even more subtle. "Don't you prefer the tough type?" someone asked. Xiao Saido did not mind and continued, "Don't you think so? Up until now, the pulp of the 100 collections has exhausted nearly 40 rounds of rule changes, burning up the last bit of material carrier, but still unable to find out Mr. Mo's background. Is that so? Hee hee." The pulp of the 100 collections laughed very sincerely. In Ban City, under the cover of the Fusang Divine Tree system, Mr. Mo can still control it to this extent. It's amazing. Fine control is only the most basic description. The concealment and concealment ability formed from this is the most amazing. 5 out of 7, 6 out of 7. After a few seconds of silence, Vice President Marin coughed. Gentle, what is the definition of gentle? Smiling, Xiao Saido stretched out his hand and drew an outline in front of him that was quite similar to Mr. Mo's. With Mr. Mo's ability to conceal his presence and restrain his psychic waves, as long as he doesn't want to show himself, the Pope of the 100 collections wouldn't be able to catch his shadow even if he had 10 pairs of eyes. But he still showed himself. Why? At least from what I've seen and understood so far, he's standing up for his subordinates and partners who are in trouble. He's providing them with protection and support, and he's not hesitating to put himself in danger. This way of doing things, isn't this a gentle heart? Xiao Saido's embellishment sounded very praiseworthy and high praise, but anyone who knew him well would feel a cold slippery snake wriggling in their ears and chest. How does the Pope of the 100 collections do things? Even Dr. Pan could figure out the meaning behind it. Faint boos and laughter could be heard in the hall. Xiao Saido accepted it calmly. He didn't want to hide it anyway. He was 6 or 7,000 kilometers away from Ban City. No matter what, he wouldn't be able to get the first prize. In that case, it would be more interesting to make the situation more chaotic. But the problem was, would Mr. Mo, who seemed to have popped out of a rock, really do what Xiao Saido analyzed? Would the Pope of the 100 collections and the Amaterasu order under his rule believe in this judgment? Interesting angle. The Pope of the 100 collections tone didn't have any interesting reaction at all. The smile on his face had faded, and under his bald head, his entire face was indifferent. You might as well think of a few more good ideas like this. Just one, I can't entrust the foundation of Ban City to this so-called gentle heart. It was obvious from his words that the Amaterasu order, or at least the Pope of the 100 collections, wasn't too willing to go against this Mr. Mo in Ban City. As for true God Qianju, well, he might already be rubbing his palms together. At least for now, the Pope of the 100 collections was still steering the ship, very quietly and honestly asking for opinions. Are there any other possibilities? Why would such a person appear in front of people at this time, at this moment, in this way? This is a question that I can't answer no matter how much I think about it. Why don't you all give me some suggestions? That's right, why? Intentional, unintentional, active, forced. These high-end ability users with rich experience could easily think of dozens or even hundreds of possibilities. But every possibility had to be supported by sufficiently solid logic. Then again, at their level, logic wasn't a necessary consideration. For example, the cause of this meeting. Gong Chi had already been dead for half a month. The Ability User Association had been searching for him all over the world, but there had been no progress at all. Suddenly, such a person had jumped out and openly displayed his deep suspicions. Moreover, it was in the territory of two top-notch extraordinaries. What logic was there to speak of in this? What do you think is going on? Dr. Pan tried to discuss with Tian Bang again. But this time, Tian Bang didn't join the conversation. Coincidentally, an order had entered his mind through the channel of the health pod. Major General Tian, the meeting hopes to understand the information related to the blood flame order in the Jin Tong incident. Please be prepared to speak. 6 out of 7 was not enough. Was this a 7 out of 7? In the end, there were still people who couldn't stay idle within the restraint faction. The first thing Tian Bang reflected upon was his own self-control. Then he considered on an even broader level, Mr. Mo's sudden appearance meant that there was nothing else he could do aside from the Blood Flame Order as a clue. The Blood Flame Order was a secret order. Actually, it had been a rather well-known organization in the inner world for several decades. Everyone knew the ins and outs of the order. There wasn't much meaning in digging further. But if he could solidify the relationship between Luo Nan and the Blood Flame Order, then the monotonous clues would immediately be plentiful and three-dimensional. Back then, the Hill of Bones in the seas outside of Xia City had long since spread into the eyes of millions and millions of ability users in the inner world along with the broadcast signal. Was there a lack of 2 or 3 people among them? Which big shot of the military wanted to decisively take a side? Or perhaps this was a higher level of sitting on top of the mountain to watch the tigers fight. It was fine to show one's stance, but did they ask for the opinions of others? Tian Bang reflected upon himself for the second time. Was it because he had been acting far too easy to bully in the outside world? So much so that any random Tom, Dick, or Harry dared to use him as a gun. Dr. Pan. Have you checked the communication privileges of the experimental center recently? This, I'm not too sure. What's wrong? There's a spam message coming in. You guys are quite open-minded. Tian Bang used his own privileges to form an overlay as he spoke. He adjusted it to the highest level of non-combat readiness. It wasn't to the extent of cutting off internal and external communications, but at the very least, there needed to be some sort of identity verification. Of course, he was currently in the midst of a human experiment. The verification work was handed over to his young but reliable aide, Lieutenant Colonel Zhu Ling, to handle. As for the spam message in front of him, what was the point of mentioning it? Having done all this, Tian Bang magnanimously became a spectator. Oh, there was also that speech. Things like bioelectricity disorder and memory errors were far too common during the human experiment phase. There was really nothing that could be done. The corner of Tian Bang's mouth twitched when Mr. Mo's thin and sickly face revealed a clear smile over at Osaka City. He extended his hand like he was plucking a fruit. He pinched one of the eyeballs within the flames of the thicket that was about to be completely burned away. I can study it for a bit. Wow! There was no telling how many people in the circular hall exclaimed at this moment. Most of them couldn't tell how many marvelous and subtle operations Mr. Mo's seemingly simple action had to be performed on the transcendent level. In any case, Mr. Mo had indeed plucked a fruit and pinched it with 3 fingers. But that wasn't the end. He raised his head again. This time, it was an overly direct angle that pierced through the projection of the live stream into the virtual circular hole. I want this one too. Chapter 874. What does he want? Has he discovered us? The higher the concealment ability of Mr. Mo's cloak, the more penetrative the light from his eyes, which were the windows of his soul. They were separated by thousands or even tens of thousands of kilometers, and the boundary between the virtual and the real lay between them. However, at this moment, a similar thought flashed through the minds of most of the audience in the virtual venue. It had nothing to do with logic. It was just their first feeling. However, the feeling didn't last long. While their thoughts were in turmoil, Mr. Mo's eyes remained fixed, and his body didn't move. The gigantic bloody fiend behind him had already made the clearest move. At this moment, the mush-mouth ape moved from stillness to a great extent and at a great speed. It was to the extent that its enormous body was like a liquid, or like a wave of light that had broken through the barrier of a solid wall. The filthy color of blood mostly covered the glitter of the light wave, but the elements contained inside were even more complicated. It seemed that a violent chemical reaction was taking place inside the bloody light and between it and the materials in the outside world. The camera shot from Captain Jimmy's perspective was instantly polluted by the bloody light. The irregular halos and spots obscured most of the details there. F***ck. In the virtual venue, several people blurted out their catchphrases. The problem was that the terrible effect of the live stream did not improve because of their curses. On the contrary, the bloodstains, halos, and spots were still unscrupulously expanding, smearing and polluting their visual field. In the end, they almost lost the meaning of analysis. There were only deformed bloodstains that interweaved into twisted and ever-changing patterns that were changing rapidly. The problem of the live stream continued to worsen, and there was no sign of it getting better. What's going on? At this moment, even Marlon and the others on the circular conference table couldn't hold back anymore. President Abner, on the other hand, quickly made a judgment. It seems that the operation team is under attack. As he spoke, he looked at the Pope of 100 Communities. He was probably the only one among all the participants who had multiple perspectives. However, the Pope was still indifferent, and he seemed to be in a trance if one looked closely. He didn't respond to Abner's gaze at all. Abner shook his head slightly and turned around to consult a key person who was only separated from him by Marlon and hadn't spoken much. Chairman Mao, should we ensure the quality of the live broadcast? The so-called Director Mao was probably the most casually dressed person at the scene. He was sitting behind the conference table, and only a red and green floral shirt could be seen on his upper body. A pair of aviator sunglasses hung around his neck. It was as if he was projecting the beautiful scenery of the Sunshine Coast. One could imagine what the lower half of his body looked like. This was the truth. Not only was this Director Mao a veteran extraordinaire, he was also an independent director of quantum holdings in the secular world and the main liaison for the Deep Blue project. He was practically the highest representative of quantum holdings in the inner world. However, unfortunately, he was currently on vacation and was in the Gold Coast. He was forced to attend the meeting, so he was somewhat unwilling and yawned non-stop. However, at this moment, his expression finally tensed up. The vertical wrinkles on his forehead also stood up, and he looked very serious. That's right, we are now an operation team directly under the Apocalypse Laboratory, and we have been attacked. This is a very serious matter. Director Mao was still describing the incident when someone interjected, "When will the live broadcast signal come back?" Director Mao acted as if he hadn't heard anything. The problem right now is the safety of the operation team members. Before he even finished speaking, the messy broadcast screen suddenly cut away from the blood-colored haze and restored the image of the Band City passenger terminal in broad daylight. However, the perspective of the live broadcast had already undergone a clear change. The angle that belonged to Captain Jimmy and was directly facing Mr. Mo had already disappeared. To be more precise, it was in the form of a painting within a painting. It had shrunk to a small area in the upper right corner, and what appeared on the main screen was a side view from the lake's surface to the terminal. From this angle, only half of Mr. Mo's back and shoulders could be seen as he sat in a wheelchair. There was also the ever-expanding anomaly that had already lost its flesh and was more like a translucent bubble of lava than an area of 20 square meters in front of him. F***CK, what is that? The mush-mouth ape. The answer was right in front of them, but none of the audience dared to confirm it. At this moment, the internal radio waves of the operation team in Band City transformed into urgent syllables that appeared in the audience's ears. Captain, Jimmy, he's been swallowed. The formatted space structure has been destroyed. It's greatly weakened. Attempting to replace the main axis. Application denied. Deep Blue's platform location has disappeared. Apocalypse array. Blah, blah, blah. There seemed to be some sensitive word that the corresponding information had been masked. The following information was even more intermittent. However, the vast majority of the audience present possessed rich combat experience. They could make guesses and understand some of the situation. As it turned out, what Mr. Mo wanted was Captain Jimmy. A more professional term would be a high-end combat machine directly under the Apocalypse Laboratory, or even the most cutting-edge 7th-generation dynamo core. Generally speaking, the roots of Jimmy's operation team were still a tightly controlled secret. However, the present virtual venue was the gathering place of the world's strongest experts. There was still a considerable portion of people who understood the crux of the matter. Their gazes unconsciously turned towards Director Mao again. The latter also began to slam the table. Vile. Vile. If he could restrain his expression a little more, perhaps it would have been more realistic. Even Dr. Pan could see it. Deep Blue and Apocalypse are at loggerheads because of the 7th-generation dynamo core. So it wasn't just a rumor. Tian Bang wasn't too interested in this. He was more concerned about the details displayed in the live broadcast. At present, the operation team had clearly fallen into an extremely awkward situation. The captain had been swallowed, and the formatted space had fallen into a leaderless state. It had to be rearranged, but the following situation didn't seem quite right. As a top-notch burner, Tian Bang very quickly discovered the abnormality from the operation team's password. Why can't the main axis be replaced? The authority of the commander should be handed over in sequence. The authority didn't pass. Dr. Pan's attention quickly shifted from the level of gossip to the professional domain. He made a professional judgment, but he soon fell into a state of confusion. Why? Since it's directly under the Apocalypse Laboratory, it's most likely the 7th-generation dynamo core. How could there be such a low-level bug in authority transfer? Why is it a bug? There's obviously another possibility. Tian Bang stared at the blood-colored bubble in the projection area and said in a low voice, "Why can't it be Captain Jimmy, the commander, who hasn't completely lost his ability to command and hasn't completely lost contact with the other operation team members? He's clearly been swallowed. Looking at that monster's appearance, it can't possibly have digested him along with his exoskeleton. Oh, could it be that the Deep Blue walkers under the control of the 7th-generation dynamo core have a qualitative leap in their ability to survive and communicate in harsh environments? That's why I said that these people shouldn't be called Deep Blue walkers. Apocalypse walkers should be more accurate." Tian Bang nodded, then shook his head. "The problem is that we don't know the nature and composition of the so-called mush-mouth ape stomach space, right?" Dr. Pan shrugged. "Think about it, saliva. It's not a magma lake inside, but a sulfuric acid pool." The corner of Tian Bang's mouth hooked up. Maybe it's not a sulfuric acid pool or a magma lake inside, but a simple space bag. At least looking at it right now, I can't recognize that fellow. There's no similarity between that fellow, an ape, or lava. At this time, from the perspective of the live broadcast, the blood-colored bubble that had swallowed Captain Jimmy seemed to have passed its peak period of transformation and was beginning to shrink. But its composition, at least in terms of density, didn't conform to people's logical understanding. It naturally became denser and denser. On the contrary, the blood-colored light was becoming thinner and thinner. Many times, a portion of the area would become somewhat transparent after a burst of undulations. It was like an illusory soap bubble. It seemed as if it could be blown away with a single breath. But the problem was that after the initial panic, the operation team had already begun a limited counterattack. All physical and energy ammunition were directed towards the blood-colored bubble. Attack! Attack! At least 5 deep blue walkers launched their attacks from the surface of the lake, from the sky, and from the distant commanding heights. The firepower interweaved into a net and converged at the visible weak points of the bubble. It seemed as if they wanted to rescue their own captain. But Mr. Mo, the instigator of everything, wasn't affected in the slightest. It seemed as if he was directly judged as a passerby. This passerby also didn't have any intention of interfering. He only played with the fruit he had just plucked with his fingertips. He allowed the astonishing firepower of the deep blue walkers to pour down on the increasingly weak, blood-colored bubble. The problem was, whether it was the metal bullets, high-explosive gunpowder, or energy blasts, regardless of whether they were supported by the format of fire, all of them were like clay oxen entering the sea after entering the blood-colored bubble. They disappeared without a sound. Tian Bang said decisively, "This is absolutely not the structural model of a flesh and blood body. This fellow is highly energized. And then, it's relatively easy to mold. It's a natural building material." Dr. Pan was simply repeating Mr. Mo's previous description. This was also the only basis. Tian Bang asked, "What is a highly malleable energized building material used to construct?" Before his voice fell, the blood-colored bubble really did turn into a soap bubble in the live broadcast. It burst noiselessly in a form that didn't have any texture. The howling net of firepower directly pierced through the pier's walkway in the area it had originally covered. It conveniently tore apart the 7 or 8 cars parked behind it. For a time, the sound of explosions rang incessantly. Gravel splashed in all directions, forcing the nearby veteran and the others to nearly jump into the lake. It was a belated display, but it was meaningless. The mushed-mouth ape disappeared along with the blood-colored bubble. At the same time, the fully armed Captain Jimmy also disappeared. That 300-kilogram top-notch creation that was a combination of man and machine had disappeared without a trace. Yes, disappeared. Tian Bang felt that this was the most accurate way to describe it. He couldn't experience any of the so-called devouring texture. He only felt that this was a magic show that had occurred in front of the world's apex powerhouses. Captain Jimmy himself wasn't much, but he was the embodiment of the Apocalypse Laboratory's most cutting-edge research results. Had all traces of its existence been erased just like that? Tian Bang only felt that this was too absurd. At this time, it was Director Mao in the flowery shirt who knocked on the virtual ring-shaped conference table with a deafening sound. "This is a disgrace. This is an extraordinary humiliation. Why the hell are we still doing a live broadcast?" The live broadcast screen began to blur as if it had heard his command. It looked as if the signal was about to be cut off. At this moment, someone sitting one person away from him also knocked on the table. "Continue." Abner's feminine voice was piercing like a sharp blade cutting through the air at this moment. Just a few milliseconds later, at least 3 to 5 powerhouses said in unison, "A painting within a painting." Chapter 875. It turned out that among people of the same level, there were some who were sharper than others. Similarly, there were also some who were more reserved. If not for Director Mao's order to cut off the signal, even if the extraordinary audience had seen through the trick, they wouldn't have exposed the truth in a tone that bordered on losing their composure in public. In front of the circular conference table, Director Mao spread his hands innocently. Under the high-resolution projection effect, the well-developed hairs on his forearms were clearly visible. But in the eyes of many, this extraordinary businessman, who was even more successful than Buhuan Gold back then, had sinister thoughts that were much more complicated than superficial hair. After being reminded, most of the participants stared at the small, picture-in-picture area in the upper right corner of the live broadcast and quickly captured the most crucial information. Captain Jimmy, who had clearly disappeared, had retreated to a corner of the live broadcast, but the filthy perspective that was presented in the form of a picture-in-picture was still there. It was still the same blood-colored spots that were twisted and densely woven. There was no entry point for analysis, but it was still changing and had some sort of a vitality. This existence alone had already formed a contradiction with the reality that it had disappeared. And if combined with the goal that people had been discussing and scheming about, it would quickly transform into a predictable explosive point. Captain Jimmy had disappeared from this world, but he still existed. So, where did he exist? Zoom in, zoom in. People like General Kenny, who had gone crazy, had already begun to bang the table and jeer, demanding that the live broadcast switch the small area of the picture-in-picture back to the main perspective. His request had not been met. In fact, it was a little presumptuous to obtain more information through a simple live broadcast. Dr. Pan, for example, had his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He even used the laboratory resources to strip down the transmitted data from the live broadcast and perform corresponding analysis, but he still couldn't find any pattern. He asked Tian Bang again, and the latter, who was trying to imagine Captain Jimmy's current situation, hesitantly said, "The only thing I can be sure of is that Jimmy's perspective changes greatly, which is completely different from the previous static view of the live broadcast. Extrapolating from normal environmental conditions, he should be moving or even rolling. But if there really is a normal environment should be an extravagant hope. And then? You're already making wild guesses. How can there be anything else?" In fact, Tian Bang had other ideas. The changes in the shape of the blood-colored spots, including the brightness and dimming of the luminosity, and even the ripples caused by the signal interference, there should be some room for further analysis in the future. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to use the recently popular configuration theory. But no matter what, he had to have first-hand information. As for where the first-hand information was, it obviously depended on the provider of the live stream service. If Tian Bang could think of it, the others could as well. "Chairman Mao, what do you think?" President Abner returned to his usual feminine tone. He was neither too fast nor too slow, showing his respectful attitude. Director Mao didn't even blink as he replied non-stop, "I've said it before, this is definitely a vile incident." The Apocalypse Laboratories team stationed in Band City was hired by the Star Alliance to take on the mission of attacking the cultists. Attacking them was undoubtedly a crime. As partners in all aspects of the Apocalypse experiment, we will communicate with each other. We must quickly reach a consensus and take action against this so-called Mr. M.O., who slaughters the innocent. It was rare that President Abner had the patience to listen to his long-winded speech, or maybe it was because Director Mao spoke too quickly, but he finally found a gap to cut in. "I'm talking about the picture-in-picture. Picture-in-picture." Director Mao appeared to be out of sorts, and didn't seem to be following President Abner's train of thought. The latter smiled and directly pointed it out. "Director Mao, Captain Jimmy's perspective is still there, isn't it? He seems to still exist in a certain area and maintain signal contact with the outside world. Of course, we don't know if this is purely a signal from the equipment or if it's good news that both the human and the computer are still there. But before the results are confirmed, we should. In fact, everyone has more positive expectations." Director Mao looked around. Sure enough, there were only two types of people in the virtual venue, those staring at the live stream and those staring at him. These people cast the so-called positive expectations gaze at him. Their eyes were bright and burning. Speaking of which, when he voted in favor of sharing the live stream resources, he didn't expect this situation at all. After a rare second of hesitation, Director Mao followed Abner's rhythm with some reluctance. It would be great if that's the case, but we don't have the information to support it at the moment. President Abner pressed close. There will be. The Apocalypse Lab should have it. As a comprehensive partner, be it Quantum Corporation, the Deep Blue Lab, or the Ability User Society, we are all willing to contribute and jointly decipher this information. Director Mao's expression was solemn. The wrinkles on his forehead and between his eyebrows formed a cross again as he tried to find his rhythm. Of course, we wouldn't have provided the corresponding live stream service otherwise. As everyone can see, the price is heavy. Speaking of which, at a time like this, the efficiency must be higher if we directly face the key issues and key people. Pope of the 100 Collections, what do you think? This was an excellent shift of the ball, and the method of blurring the focus was excellent. The participants began to look in all directions and listen in all directions. At the same time, they paid attention to the size of the live stream as well as the topic of conversation in the venue, for fear of missing a crucial detail. The Pope of the 100 Collections was also smiling, but he also took a longer time to respond. That's why I've been asking for everyone's opinion. Now that things have come to this, is Mr. Mo being driven by a tender heart, or is he trying to declare something? Only by unraveling this riddle will we be able to take corresponding actions later on. Because of Director Mao, the live stream provided by Deep Blue, and the Apocalypse Lab, as well as the collected information and data, we might have found an opportunity to crack this riddle. Alright, it was back to square one again. Director Mao was sure that he had been cruelly surrounded, but he couldn't blame anyone else. After witnessing the unexpected harvest of the picture-in-picture, his greed had arisen on the spur of the moment, and it had aroused public anger. Again, who would have expected that Mr. Mo would actually make such a big mistake and present the place that everyone coveted in front of everyone in such a manner? It was that place, without a doubt, right? Up until now, all the heavyweight conclusions were just inferences. But the continuous changes in events, although not to the point of being a solid hammer, were still like the chisels in the hands of craftsmen, knocking down the originally thick and heavy barrier bit by bit, exposing the outline of the truth. From now on, all that was needed was a little bit of imagination to more or less sketch out the entire truth. It was precisely this little bit that made the high-end people present wary, but it also inevitably stimulated gambling-like expectations. At times like this, as long as they were a little bit earlier than others, Captain Jimmy, who was a little bit earlier, and the Apocalypse Lab behind him, thus became the target of everyone's jealousy. Director Mao couldn't cut it in time, and couldn't cut it, so he naturally became the target of focus fire. Now, apart from throwing up his hands, he could only say some strange words and mock himself. You've gone around in such a big circle, but you can't even strangle someone to death with a knot. Why bother? Besides, he's right there. Just ask him directly. Ask? There was a sudden momentary silence in the virtual venue. Director Mao's words actually didn't have the effect of striking a blow to the head. They were just absurd. Would Mr. Mo pay attention to you directly if you asked him directly? But on further thought, if he didn't pay attention, why would he openly expose himself? For a moment, the venue was filled with hesitation. A considerable number of them looked at one another, till someone ventured, "Why don't we have a talk? Talk about how to take Gong Chi's old life." "Shut up, you old bastard. Let's talk about serious business." Who's going to talk? At this moment, the operation team's rescue operation had already lost its meaning. A few Deep Blue walkers stopped. They stopped at the scene of the incident with a dignified and awkward posture. Stopping was already like this, so there was no need to mention going forward to talk. If they forced it, it might be another Captain Jimmy. As for the last person to talk to Mr. M.O., Goto Masayoshi, he had already died without a complete corpse. The surrounding Heavenly Nations people had also pretty much dispersed. Looking around, there was actually no one suitable to talk to Mr. M.O. in the vicinity of the passenger terminal. It really isn't easy to find someone. Their status isn't equal. The Pope of Baiji rubbed his bald head and smiled amiably. Why don't I go ask? Someone immediately objected, don't. It was so unpleasant just now. It won't look good if we fight again because of a disagreement. Of course, the synchronized translation of the participants was, what if you take the opportunity to secretly give it to him? That being said, if the Pope of Baiji wanted to take the initiative to communicate with Mr. M.O., no one present could stop him. Perhaps it had already begun. In a moment of desperation, someone spoke indiscriminately, why don't we let this person participate as well? Let that Luo, someone pass on a message. Fortunately, this person didn't break his brain from the anxiety. He forcefully swallowed the word Nan back down. Even so, the expression in Ouyang Chen's eyes behind the smooth lenses made him break out in a cold sweat. Tian Bang, who was watching the excitement, let out a heh. Speaking of Luo Nan, when the situation developed to this degree, the sensitive speech came to an end. The affairs of the world were like this. It was better to have less trouble than less trouble. Previously, the secret of the alternate space was guarded to the death. Quite a few people here hated that they couldn't gang up and attack. But once there was a gap, they all thought of playing tricks. To put it bluntly, they were all people with great families and businesses. They could eat and drink to their heart's content just by opening their mouths. Who would be willing to give up wealth and glory and gamble their lives? If Mr. Mo had calculated this point and intentionally acted this way, then his methods alone were enough to show his brilliance. Just as he was pondering, he heard someone shout, "Oh, he's looking over again." Chapter 876. Everyone's gazes turned to the live broadcast at the same time, but soon, intermittent boos rang out. The reason was simple. The one looking over wasn't Mr. Mo, who had been a passerby for a long time, but the female assistant behind him. The first person to issue a warning was an extraordinaire. Even in the circle of his own kind, being directly looked down upon like this was quite humiliating. It was hard to avoid a few retorts. Are you all blind? What did Mr. Mo just tell her? Is that so? It seems so. Someone testified. Mr. Mo had indeed called out to Yin Lu, and the latter had bent down to listen carefully. Since it was a side view, it was impossible to see what he had instructed her. But in a few seconds, Yin Lu straightened her body and turned her head slightly, giving the camera a clearer view of her side profile. The camera and the line of sight were at the wrong angle, but it was obvious that Yin Lu was looking in his direction. At this moment, Mr. Mo nodded to the veteran in the distance. He extended his thumb and pinky and made a hand gesture, indicating that he had something to do. The wheelchair beneath him turned around nimbly and headed towards the cruise that was docked at the pier. He had actually left just like that. There were no longer any obstacles between Mr. Mo and the cruise. Perhaps the Fusang Divine Tree's great divine treasure system hidden in the endless sunlight was one, but the Pope of the 100 Communities didn't show any intention of stopping him. There were quite a few people who suspected that this extremely intelligent Pope Empress Dowager had already used her geographical advantage to secretly form a connection with Mr. Mo. Hadn't he already volunteered to do it? After Mr. Mo left, Yin Lu, who had been acting like a personal member, didn't follow him. On the contrary, she turned her body towards the lake and nodded in that direction. The live broadcast paused for a moment. The camera language perfectly displayed the ignorance of the owner of the camera. Of course, he was definitely receiving instructions. 2 seconds later, the coverage area of the live broadcast began to shrink and rapidly converged on Ian Lee's surroundings. It was obvious that the owner of the live broadcast was currently approaching Ian Lowe. In the virtual venue, there were noises of "lock Mr. Mo down," but most people still maintained a high level of interest in the unforeseen event. In the end, the camera gave Ian Lowe a close-up. From this moment on, the second-in-command of the Blood Flame Order, who only had a little fame in the inner world, had entered the sights of at least 2/5 of the extraordinaries in the world. However, her eyes were still a little out of focus. She didn't seem to understand Mr. Mo's arrangement, nor did she know anything about the live broadcast. She was just a narrator. What "sir" means is that you can start bidding now. The virtual venue was silent for a short period of time. A considerable number of people looked at each other and exchanged glances. And on a level that was invisible to the audience, the information exchanged in secret should be 1,000 times more than this. With great difficulty, someone finally followed up, "That's direct enough. Are you sure he didn't participate?" Or perhaps, the vast majority of people added a connection in their minds. Their gazes, whether direct or indirect, revolved around Ouyang Qin and Her Majesty Empress Wu. Unfortunately, there was no response. Ian Lo didn't explain further after that. Instead, she turned to the veterans and comforted them. In the blink of an eye, the amount of energy and tongue spent on this had already exceeded the so-called announcement of the price. Moreover, the difference was still growing. This also made all the participants certain that they couldn't obtain any more information from the live broadcast. What made them even more annoyed was that the most crucial picture-in-picture had stopped. It was as if an absurd play had suddenly come to an end. The abstract changes that could cause the imaginations of the extraordinaries present to run wild had suddenly locked onto a single instant. Even if all the participants' gazes were focused on it, they couldn't move it even a little bit. Several seconds later, that small window turned into an irritating snowflake noise that drowned out the last bit of people's thoughts. F***CK, this is provocation. Someone slammed the table and stood up. His stocky figure looked extremely intimidating, but unfortunately, there were only a few who responded. The vast majority of people's thoughts were far from reaching the point where they needed to display extreme emotions. They only grew like weeds and flew around like mosquitoes. What's the meaning of this? Is he trying to show that he can control the transmission of information from the alternate dimension? Why is he in such a hurry to show this? Is he tired of living? Does he really want us to bid that alternate dimension? Cooperation and development? That's so smart. Is he overthinking things? Maybe he's simply saying this to that operation team, to the people behind them. He's saying that he wants to use money to redeem them. Inside and outside the venue, the interaction between many people and many levels continued to heat up. However, the significance of the virtual venue itself wasn't that important anymore. I need to reflect on how a mere appraisal meeting has come to this stage. Amidst the buzzing noise of the virtual venue, President Abner gently stroked the yellow beard on his cheek. He maintained a state of communication with Director Mao on Marlin's side, but the topic of conversation changed extremely quickly. The broadcast from T-City has stopped. But I heard that Kadro's soul has returned to his body. No matter what he does, he's still a member of the society. Today, his soul was heavily injured, and the consequences are hard to predict. The society has to do something about it. In a private conversation, Director Mao was much more frank this time. Well, we're the ones who contacted Kadro. As the person directly responsible, we're the ones who can't shirk the responsibility. Don't even think about it. We definitely won't let such important research material go. Is it Tianchi who's not letting it go, or is it Deep Blue who's not letting it go? We can discuss this issue after the meeting. President Abner laughed. Why do we have to discuss after the meeting? Of course, it's not good to end it in a hurry. Why don't we take a break first? The last sentence was directly transmitted to the ears of every participant. Take a break. At present, the situation has already exceeded the scope of the original topic of the meeting. Due to the limitations of the conditions, there are still many people who haven't had the time to attend the meeting and participate in the discussion. For example, His Excellency the Priestess of the Order of Justice. Why don't we take a break for now? Tomorrow, or perhaps a few days later, we can discuss it again. Most of the participants were somewhat tempted. In reality, there were indeed many people who needed to gather their scattered thoughts. They also needed some time and space to settle their thoughts. But then again, if the meeting was adjourned, there was no doubt that it would give some of the true bigwigs the opportunity to form alliances. Perhaps the entire situation would be completely different during the next meeting. It was even uncertain whether there would be a second half of the meeting. Many people fell into a dilemma. The problem was that as the organizer of the meeting, President Abner had sufficient authority to enforce this suggestion. The next second, before some people could voice their objections, Marlon, who had received a signal from President Abner with his eyes, knocked on the table. Then we'll take a break. As for the resumption time, we will inform you later. Someone cursed out loud. However, the broken signal connection turned all of this into meaningless nonsense. Most people didn't have the leisure to care about this. They needed to spend more effort to lock onto the truly meaningful information from this conference that had almost no conclusion. They also needed to use their own connections and other resources to search for the mine and dig out the real gold. Of course, for some people who currently had first-hand information, it would be even better if they could seize the opportunity to capture a new entry point. The plans of the higher-ups always needed to be executed by the people at the bottom. Right now, in the operation team at North Mountain Lake, Team Deputy Mend had received the latest order. This order bypassed their direct superior, Supervisor Bai, who did not really fulfill her responsibilities, and directly took command through the internal authority channel. Lock the original format space settings and Captain's main authority. Activate full sensory mode. Until there is a clear change of command, maintain this state. Mend confirmed his new supervisor. At the same time, he also confirmed that this old superior, who was slightly younger than him, was still in a bad mood. Therefore, he first opened his mouth to accept the order. After a while, he carefully added, Supervisor Yen, currently, the Apocalypse Array can no longer detect Captain Jimmy's signal. I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on here for too long. Yin Yongbu's voice sounded like he was chewing on ice. I will activate the superior structure to give you the necessary support. This. Aren't you in T-City? If it's consumed. Care about what you should care about. Yes, sir. Men subconsciously straightened his back, causing the entire Deep Blue Walker to buzz. At the same time, the 7th-generation dynamo core that was deeply implanted in his brain and spinal nervous system emitted a clear electrical signal. It actively connected to the archetype format hub of him and all the other team members around him. A layer of faint yet real and wonderful structure spread out from the distant void. It also seemed to be growing from the inside out. The two ends, near and far, resonated with each other and fused together at a higher level that surpassed the spiritual sea. In less than a second, Yen Yongbu's superior architecture had crossed thousands of kilometers of the Pacific Ocean, arrived at Osaka, and exerted its influence. However, this function was rather restrained. It was only a template with a weak stickiness. It helped the formatted space on this side, which was on the verge of collapsing due to the lack of the main axis, to do a simple splicing and gluing. At the same time, the missing structures that had been glued together formed an even stronger magnetic force between each other. Then, he used this magnetic force to search for the signals of the main axis that had been cut off. As for whether it was useful or not, Mend, who was on the front lines, wasn't sure. It wasn't just because the signal was so weak that it far exceeded the limits of his perception. It was also because after the superior structure was laid down, frontline personnel like them only existed as antennae. They no longer needed to undertake the function of analysis. It should be useful. The long-range support of the Apocalypse Array consumed a lot of electricity. Men's active thoughts gradually settled in the deepest part of his heart until he entered an extremely quiet and pure state. Whether Captain Jimmy's signal was there or not was no longer a problem for him to consider. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.